Chapter 776. Hey kid, did the sun rise from the west today? Or is my eyes playing tricks on me? Why are you here? Although the voice from the front was not loud, there were not many people in the imperial court who dared to speak like this in the main hall, and completely disregard the censor. Li sighed and said helplessly, I can't help it. His Majesty summoned me. Old General Shui looked at him and asked in surprise, Why did His Majesty summon you? Li was curious himself. If the old emperor wanted to summon him for something, he would usually summon him in private. Every time he summoned him to court, nothing good would come out of it. Old General Shui did not ask further. He walked to his side and said in a low voice, You have to leave a good spot for the Shui family on the Academy's stele. Li looked at him in surprise and said, Shouldn't you talk to Her Highness about this? Old General Shui glanced at him and said, Don't think I don't know. Although Her Highness is the one behind the Academy, it must be your idea behind the scenes. The Chui family did not offend the princess. Her Highness would not do such a sinister thing. I don't know what old Shui is talking about. Li leaned against a pillar and said, I really can't control the Academy. Old Shui, you should talk to Her Highness. Based on the relationship between the princess and the family of generals, not to mention a good spot for the Shui family on the Academy's stele. You can even erect a stele outside the Academy for old Shui. Pfft, why erect a stele for me? I'm not dead yet. Old General Shui glanced at him but was not angry. He said, It's not convenient for me to show up for Her Highness. If others see it, they will inevitably think that Her Highness is abusing her position for personal gain. You are different. The Li family has donated a lot of money. It's impossible for others to gossip. You can just help me blow pillow talk. In truth, Li already had a plan in mind. Although the family of generals wasn't exactly impoverished, their lives had only gotten better recently. It was impossible for them to donate a lot of silver and compete with the aristocratic families. In reality, he had always wanted to separate one of the academies and build it into the military academy of this era, specializing in cultivating military talents. At that time, after old General Shui, old General Ma, and the other veterans retired, they would also be able to play their remaining role and teach some students. This would be of great benefit to the continuation of the family of generals. This was also what they were willing to do. When Li visited them last time, he heard the generals sigh. If they didn't even have to attend court in the future, they would probably be very bored. These old generals were very good to him. In the past, they had shielded him from many storms in the imperial court. Naturally, he would have some selfishness in the matters of the academy and would do something for the family of generals. Of course, apart from this, there was another reason that could not be stated clearly. However, he had to discuss this matter with them in advance. Otherwise, they would think that he was abusing the elderly and squeezing out the remaining value of the old generals. He couldn't take the blame for that. Really, old General Shui didn't seem to care at all about squeezing out the remaining value of him. Instead, he was in high spirits. Li nodded and said, Of course, but this has to be agreed upon by the old generals. After all, no one in the Jing Kingdom knows better than you all when it comes to arranging troops, breaking through enemy lines and charging. When the time comes, it will still be you who will manage the entire academy. Of course, the nominal dean will be Her Royal Highness. When all the academies in the country were built, the eldest princess would be the dean of all the academies. Not just in name, she would be equivalent to the Minister of Education of the Jing Kingdom. This position would not be given to anyone else by the royal family. Don't worry. Those old fellows would love to have something to do when the time comes. Of course, old General Shui understood what he meant. The imperial court wouldn't completely hand over such an academy to them. It was better to have the eldest princess as the dean than someone else. Those old fellows wouldn't object. He originally wanted to ask for more details, but the hall suddenly became quiet. Seeing a figure walking out from the back of the hall, old General Shui immediately returned to his original position. Li poked his head out from behind the pillar. When he saw that Emperor Jing was already sitting on the dragon chair, he quickly shrank back. The most important topic discussed in the imperial court today was still the flood control. The imperial court had sent several groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they couldn't effectively deal with it. The focus of this morning's discussion was this matter. The officials were all eager to offer advice, but very few of them were able to put forward constructive suggestions. They either repeated the routine of the predecessors or said some nonsense that seemed reasonable, but were actually all fake. Li Yi was a little annoyed listening to them from behind the pillar. Emperor Jing looked at the noisy imperial court below. His eyes swept around a few times, but he didn't see a certain figure. He frowned and said, "Where is Li Yi?" The pillar in the hall was very thick, just enough to cover his entire body. When Li Yi heard it for the second time, he realized that someone was calling him. He walked out from behind the pillar, bowed and said, "I'm here." Emperor Jing saw him hiding behind the pillar again and glared at him vaguely. He said, "The imperial court has sent 2 groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they failed. In your opinion, how should we deal with the flood this time?" As soon as Emperor Jing said this, many people in the imperial court looked slightly gloomy. Regarding the flood control, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court expressed their opinions, but no one could enter Emperor Jing's eyes. Only County Marquis Li was pointed out by Emperor Jing, even though he hid behind the pillar. It showed how much Emperor Jing trusted him. This was really not a good thing for some people in the imperial court. "Your Majesty, what I want to say has already been said by the officials," Li Yi said helplessly. "I really don't know how to deal with the flood." The power of nature was so terrible that even in the later generations, it was not something that could be resisted by human beings. No matter how many books he read and how much knowledge he had, he did not think that he could be better than the professional flood control officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance. Moreover, limited by technology, the flood control methods of the later generations could not be realized in the present. His knowledge was not of much use as a reference. Moreover, he had to analyze the actual situation and conduct field investigations. It was better not to get involved in this muddy water. In a few months, Rui would give birth. He did not want to leave at this time. Before this, he had left for a long time. "Okay, you can leave." Emperor Jing waved his hand, and realized that he had subconsciously regarded him as the last straw of hope. Dealing with the flood was not a matter of memorizing books or reciting poems. Even the officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance could not do it. What good method could he have? Some people in the hall sneered. It was true that County Marquis Li was good at using some strange tricks, but when it came to governing a country or things that required real ability, he would show his true colors. This time, Li Yi did not return to his original position. He had been called out by the old emperor once. It was not good to hide behind the pillar again. "You should not have said that just now." Old General Shui slowly moved to his side and said in a low voice, "Even if you really don't understand, you can repeat it according to what the person in front of you said. Don't use such tricks in the future." "I understand." Li didn't mind. If he didn't link it to the actual situation and just talked about it, the people in the imperial court wouldn't be a match for him, even if they joined forces. However, this kind of thing couldn't be discussed on paper. One word from him could cause countless people to suffer. It was better not to speak. The matter of controlling the flood did not come to a conclusion in the end, and could only be temporarily put aside. The imperial court once again sent more officials over. Li estimated that today's morning court should be over soon. Should he go to the old monk Tan-Yin or old Taoist Yuan first? This was a question worth thinking about. At this moment, Emperor Jing above said something, and a eunuch walked out from behind him. It seemed that he was going to announce an imperial edict. Li Yi decided to go back to find out the situation first, and then make a plan. He inadvertently looked up and found that Emperor Jing was looking at him. His heart thumped, and he instantly had a very bad premonition. Chapter 777. The old emperor's gaze seemed to have a deeper meaning, and the ominous feeling in Li Yi's heart intensified. At that moment, he was in a trance, so he didn't hear clearly what the eunuch had said at the start. He seemed to have called out his name, or perhaps he had heard wrongly. In any case, the eunuch had said a lot, and Li Yi could only hear that he was praising someone. Something about a young hero, countless contributions to the country, and 1,000 years of good fortune, and a series of more flowery words, praising that person as rare in the world and hard to find in the heavens. Li finally relaxed. Although he was outstanding, he wasn't that outstanding. It seemed like the eunuch wasn't talking about him. As long as the person didn't find trouble with him, he could do whatever he wanted. To be conferred the title of Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, a great honor. Li understood the last sentence. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, and he wondered which big shot had retired. No wonder the old emperor was so generous with his praise. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury was a third-rank official. Although it was just a rank and title without any real power, it was an extremely high honor for an official in the imperial court. This kind of official arrangement was inherited from the previous dynasty. After an official retired, the imperial court wouldn't ignore them. Usually, they would arrange a suitable place for them, and at the same time, squeeze out their remaining value and give them a rank but no real power, such as an advisor to the nation. This was also a tradition in the Jing Kingdom. Usually, it was given to retired officials. They could also participate in the imperial court, and their status was usually higher. However, this was only limited to the more respected officials. Ordinary officials didn't have this qualification. Before these officials retired, they were the prime minister and other pillars of the country. Even after they retired, the emperor would still attach great importance to their opinions. Therefore, although they didn't have any real power, they had a deep influence on the imperial court. Li remembered hearing the words young hero just now, but he must have heard wrongly. He turned to look at old General Shui and asked, which official in the imperial court retired? After he finished speaking, he saw that old General Shui was looking straight at him with an expression of extreme shock. Not only old General Shui, but the surrounding officials also looked at him as though they were looking at a monster, their faces full of disbelief. What's wrong? Li opened his mouth and asked. That extremely bad premonition appeared again. What are you waiting for? Thank you. Old General Shui whispered and pushed Li out. What are you thanking me for? Li staggered and stood in the middle of the hall, his face full of confusion. Your Majesty, you can't do that. Before he could react, an old figure walked out of the crowd and said loudly, County Marquis Li is a young hero and has made countless contributions to the country, but he has just been crowned as the Minister of Honor. There has never been such a precedent in our dynasty. Your Majesty, please reconsider. This person was an official of the censorate. Li stood there in a daze. He couldn't believe his ears. The person the eunuch had just read was himself. What kind of joke was this? An official was still an official, and he had to work. The old emperor definitely wouldn't just give him a title for fun. He was still waiting to take care of his child, so why would he be an official? Actually, after the eunuch finished reading, the entire court was already boiling. Even the supervising censorate, who was supposed to maintain discipline, was stunned. A county marquis at the age of 21 was already the only precedent in the dynasty. Needless to say, he was a county marquis, and he had risen from a commoner without a noble title in just 2 years. As early as when he was made a marquis, there was quite a commotion in the court. There were countless officials who submitted petitions to the emperor to retract the order. Not to mention the officials who already had enmity with him. Even the officials who didn't have a deep relationship with him, and didn't have any interest in him felt that it was inappropriate. However, when he was kidnapped, the emperor was furious and severely punished 2 officials who didn't want to let go of the matter. After that, no one dared to provoke the emperor again. A county marquis was a county marquis. At that time, no one knew if he could come back. As time passed, the matter completely calmed down. After he came back, there were a few people who brought up the matter again, but they were all lightly brushed aside by the emperor. Thus, the matter of him being made a marquis was completely settled. It hadn't been that long, but the emperor actually made him a marquis. What kind of favor was this? Since the founding of the country, those who were given this position were all important officials who had worked hard for the country for their whole lives and were respected by all officials. What virtue did a young boy have? This was no longer a favor, it was a special favor. Thus, some officials in the court became excited. As if they were injected with chicken blood, they listed dozens of reasons why Marquis Li couldn't be made a marquis. Their spittle flew in all directions and they were full of righteousness. Of course, the most talked about reason was that he was too young. Although he had made great contributions to the country, was familiar with the classics, and had high attainments in mathematics, he didn't know how to govern a country and wasn't qualified for this position. After all, although the Marquis was only a disbanded official, he had directly participated in the affairs of the country, and had an extremely important position in the court. It couldn't be held by a young man. These were all pleasant to hear. To be more serious, they directly pointed out that the emperor shouldn't be so fond of him. Since ancient times, those who were favored by the emperor were all sycophants. Li Yi retreated behind the pillar again to avoid being stained by their spittle. He showed an extremely depressed expression on his face. Naturally, he was depressed because the old emperor was looking for trouble. He didn't even bother to be the dean. How could he be a doctor? He planned to stay at home and be a full-time nanny to take care of the child after Rui gave birth. Naturally, the less trouble, the better. How could you hide such a big thing? Old General Shui came over and saw the expression on his face. Then he looked at a certain official who was still talking incessantly. He curled his lips and said, "Don't worry about those people. They can't do anything about the emperor's decision." Of course, Li Yi wasn't worried about this, but he couldn't explain it to him. At this time, many people around him had already congratulated him with cupped hands. If he didn't have a few friends in the court, he would be a failure. In fact, except for the Cui family and those firm supporters of the king of Shu, no one went up to advise him. "All right, I have made up my mind. If you have any other opinions, we will discuss them later." Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and waved his hand. Court dismissed. Li Yi didn't even have the chance to refuse. He saw Emperor Jing stand up and leave. At this time, most people in the court had their eyes on him. Li Yi bid farewell to old General Shui and the rest before striding out of the hall. He didn't want to stay here and be looked at like a monkey. "Lord Li, please wait." Not long after he walked out of the hall, a voice came from behind. Li Yi turned his head and saw the master of the Wang family walking towards him quickly. At this moment, he naturally couldn't leave directly. The master of the Wang family walked forward and cupped his hands. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Lord Li. Let's walk and talk." Seeing that many people had walked out of the hall, Li pointed to the front and said. The master of the Wang family stopped him not only to congratulate him, but also to talk about the Wang family's scholarship. In the future, the Wang family would take out a sum of money every year to reward the outstanding students of the academy, covering all the future academies in the Jing kingdom. In addition, he also expressed his willingness to set up the same scholarship for the School of Mathematics. Naturally, Li Yi wouldn't refuse. The Wang family wanted to establish a reputation among the scholars, which was what the old emperor wanted to see. Li Yi always felt that he took special care of the Wang family, not only because they were stupid, rich and obedient, but he didn't want to know the reason. He didn't need to think about it. After separating from the master of the Wang family, when he was about to walk out of the palace, he realized that he had been interrupted by that matter, and forgot to find the eldest princess to understand the progress of the academy. He turned back and naturally received the congratulations of a group of officials. When he met the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of War, he had to stop and say a few words. He had already wasted a lot of time coming to the morning dew hall. The little palace maid at the door saw him and was stunned. She stopped in front of him and said, "Marquis, the princess." She had never stopped him before. Li Yi asked in surprise, "The princess is not here?" The little palace maid nodded and said, "Her Highness has gone to the Imperial Garden." "Then I will go to the Imperial Garden to find her." Li Yi nodded and walked in a certain direction. He was also familiar with the Imperial Garden. In the summer, the Imperial Garden was dense with trees and was a good place to escape the heat. Although he could enter the Imperial Palace at will, he couldn't enter a place like the Imperial Garden at will. The guard at the door went in to report, and soon came out to lead him in. The eldest princess was sitting in a pavilion in the garden, looking down at something. Li Yi sat opposite her and said, "I came this morning to attend court, so I didn't bring soup." Emingzi didn't seem to hear what he said. She looked up at him and asked, I heard that father has conferred you the title of Minister of Honor? She was well informed. Li was a little depressed. He nodded and said, I don't know what His Majesty is thinking. Isn't this nonsense? Emingzi glanced at him and looked at the lush green beside her. She said softly, Father has his reasons for conferring you the title of Minister of Honor. Don't talk nonsense. Chapter 778. Time passed by half an hour. After the court was dismissed, Emperor Jing did not directly return to his bedroom. Instead, he habitually called the 2 prime ministers and several high-ranking officials in the court, and went all the way to the imperial garden. In the past, he would discuss with these people in the imperial garden about things that had not been decided in the court, and finally made a decision. Apart from a few matters, he had never acted arbitrarily in the affairs of the state. When he walked out of the hall, he stopped and said to a eunuch behind him, Go to the Morning Dew Hall and invite Princess Royal here. Although Emingzi was only a woman, he did not know when he started to treat her as a girl who only loved martial arts. Some of her views on state affairs and political affairs often made his eyes light up, and even directly changed his thoughts and decisions. In the past 2 years, it was especially so. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Shen, and several high-ranking officials naturally had no objection to this. They were not qualified to object. What Princess Royal had done in the past 2 years, even if all of them added up, was still shameful. Just like in the folk opera, women were not inferior to men. It was not an exaggeration to use this word to describe Princess Royal. In the imperial garden, Emperor Jing sat on a stone chair in the pavilion. Prime Minister Shen and Prime Minister Qin were old, so Emperor Jing specially allowed them to sit together. As for the other high-ranking officials, they could only stand. I confer the title of Marquis of Chang, and Li Yi as Minister of Jinzi Guanglu. What do you all think? Just now in the hall, these people did not speak. In their position, unless the emperor's decision was extremely inappropriate, they would not take the initiative to speak up. Prime Minister Qin pondered for a moment and said, Marquis Li Yi is a young hero and has made countless contributions to our Jing kingdom. However, Your Majesty has already given him a great favor by promoting him to a county marquis. I think that Marquis Li Yi is still too young, and does not understand state affairs and politics. He is not qualified to be a minister of Jinzi Guanglu. If Your Majesty insists on this, I am afraid that many officials in the court will be disappointed. Even he did not dare to deny Li Yi's achievements. Just the matter of heavenly punishment alone was enough to make him more meritorious than all the officials in the imperial court. Not to mention that he had turned the tide, defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom, and founded the computing academy. Prime Minister Qin was the prime minister of a dynasty. He knew Li Yi's contributions to the Jing kingdom better than anyone else. His Majesty had conferred him the title of a county marquis, because he had indeed made great contributions. This could not be denied by anyone. However, if he were to become the youngest Golden Ziguanglu minister in the history of the Jing kingdom, it would be too much. Those who had held this position in the past were all old officials with decades of political experience and high prestige. It was really not a position that a young boy who did not understand politics could take. Emperor Jing's eyes looked to the side, and several ministers also spoke one after another. Although they did not have a negative attitude towards this matter, they did not agree with it either. They did not lean towards Prime Minister Qin, nor did they have any enmity with County Marquis Li. They just felt that this matter was inappropriate from the bottom of their hearts. The reason was the same as what Prime Minister Qin had said. It was a very important official position for the imperial court, and it could not be given to a boy who did not understand state affairs. This could be seen from his speech in the hall just now. Prime Minister Shen, who had been silent, finally opened his mouth when Emperor Jing looked over. I think this matter. Your Majesty should think twice. This meant that no one agreed with him. Emperor Jing did not show any dissatisfaction on his face. Before this, he had already guessed the reaction of the officials. After all, Li Yi was still too young. However, even if he really did not understand politics, as long as he was in the imperial court, he could solve the problem that all the officials could not solve. His meritorious service was far more than this, but he would not become an official with real power. Apart from this, he could not give the other party anything else. Seeing that Emingzu had been standing for a while, Emperor Jing waved his hand and no longer mentioned that matter. He said, "This matter will be put aside for the time being. As for the flood in the south..." Prime Minister Qin bowed his head slightly and sighed in his heart. Putting it aside for the time being meant that it could not be changed. In the end, he still underestimated the position of County Marquis Li in His Majesty's heart. How could the King of Shu make such a strong enemy for no reason? As for the flood in the south, they also had some ideas in their hearts after listening to the comments of many officials in the imperial court. Emingzu recorded all their words. Not long after, a palace guard came in from outside. Changde stood outside the pavilion, stopped him and asked, "What's the matter?" The guard said, "County Marquis Li is outside and wants to see the first princess." Before Changde spoke, a voice came from behind. Emperor Jing raised his head, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He said, "Let him in. Father has his reasons for conferring you the title of Honorable Minister Jinzi. Don't talk nonsense." Li looked at the first princess, and his eyes were a little surprised. The two of them would occasionally grumble when they talked, but this level of grumbling was nothing at all. He shook his head and said, "I'm not talking nonsense. This position was originally given to those retired old officials. How can it be given so casually?" Emingzu looked at him and glanced in a certain direction intentionally or unintentionally. Behind the thick bushes, an official frowned slightly and was about to step forward. Emperor Jing waved his hand, and a trace of ridicule appeared on his face. The official immediately lowered his head and stood quietly behind him. "It's really not appropriate. I have to talk to His Majesty. I'm at most a little clever, but I don't know anything about governing a country." Li Yi saw her eyes looking at him for a while, and then to the side. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong with your eyes? Is there sand in them? Do you want me to help you blow them?" Emingzu coughed softly, lowered her head slightly, and said, "I'm fine." Seeing that she was really fine, Li Yi then asked about the serious matter. "How's the progress of the academy?" "Everything is going according to the plan. Everything is going well." Behind the bushes, several officials, including Prime Minister Qin, showed a shocked expression on their faces. According to the conversation between the first princess and County Marquis Li, the matter of the academy that caused a stir in the capital city a few days ago was not done by the first princess, but by someone else? The overt plot that made countless aristocratic families complain, but could not be obeyed, was done by him? When they recalled that he seemed to have used the same method to almost wipe out the forces of the Cui clan and the King of Shu in the account investigation, they all felt lucky at the same time. Lucky that they were not his enemy. No, just now they objected to His Majesty's reward. Would he bear a grudge against them because of this? Li Yi did not know that behind the tree shadow, some people were already imagining things. After learning about the progress of the academy, he was relieved. He inadvertently glanced at a few pieces of paper on the table, looked at them carefully and said in surprise, Are you thinking about a way to control the flood?" Emingzu did not know the intention of her father, nor did she know when Li Yi would leave. She nodded absent-mindedly. "I didn't know about it before. I don't know much about controlling the flood." The first princess finally became the proactive and diligent first princess again. Li Yi felt very gratified in his heart. He waved his hand and said, "No one is born to know. If you don't know, I can teach you." Behind the tree shadow, Jingdi's expression froze, and the corners of his mouth could not help but twitch. Chapter 779. Just now the old emperor had asked him what he thought about flood control, but Li Yi had said that he did not understand. He really did not understand. The flood in the south had been going on for a long time, and all the officials in the imperial water surveillance had no solution. Li Yi estimated that by the time they came up with a solution, the flood would have passed, and it did not matter whether they could cure it or not. No matter how rich his theoretical knowledge was, it was just an armchair strategist. He did not think that the officials of the imperial water surveillance who had been dealing with floods for their entire lives would know less than him in this regard. Now, in front of the eldest princess, he said that he understood. He really did understand. He was not really asked to control the flood. He was an armchair strategist, and that was what he was best at. Since ancient times, there has been a saying that to govern a country, one must first control the flood. Speaking of flood control, it can be traced back to the period of Yao and Shun. Yu the Great was ordered to control the flood. Until now, it has gone from avoiding to controlling, from blocking to spreading, from spreading to guiding, from passivity to initiative, from single to comprehensive. Mingzhu's red lips slightly opened, and she looked at him in a daze. She had just heard the official's ideas on flood control. Although it was reasonable, it was extremely complicated. In terms of order, it was not as clear as what Li Yi had just said. His tone did not pause at all. From ancient times, along the timeline, he talked about the deeds and methods of the officials in the past dynasties, including the advantages and disadvantages of the methods they used, what needed to be learned, and what needed to be abandoned. It was clear and orderly. Of course, Li Yi could speak in an orderly manner, because the books were arranged according to the timeline. Of course, the books on flood control in the Jing Kingdom were just some messy records, but the experts and scholars of later generations, who seemed to be idle to him, had thoroughly studied these things, and even extended them to the field of philosophy. Thus, Emperor Jing and several court officials, who were hiding behind the bushes, all knew how to apply the idea of the unity of heaven and man to flood control, how to link flood control with the Taoist theory of yin and yang and 5 elements, and how to add the idea of complying with nature to the idea of flood control. Li felt that the experts and scholars of the later generations were too good at talking nonsense. After saying it once, he was almost convinced himself. If old Taoist Yuan heard these words, he would be very happy. Maybe he would be able to ascend and meet his Taoist ancestors once he gained enlightenment. Of course, these were just seasonings. In the end, they still had to return to the main topic. The flood control methods of later generations that relied on science and technology were not suitable here. However, some correct concepts would be of great inspiration to her. If the old emperor asked, she would be able to give him a clear answer. Li Yi felt that even the officials of the imperial water surveillance lacked the knowledge and experience accumulated over hundreds and thousands of years. In theory, they were slightly inferior to her. However, the flood had been there for a long time. According to past practice, there was no need to treat it anymore. The next time there was a flood, it could be used. Princess Royal Highness fully displayed the principle that a good memory was better than a bad pen, and wrote down everything he said one by one. You don't know how to control floods? Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes. The scene in the main hall had replayed in his mind for the umpteenth time. Qin Xiang and the others finally realized that it wasn't that he didn't understand at all. In fact, he knew more than anyone else. However, why didn't he say these words in court? Emperor Jing glanced through the gap. When he was about to lift his foot and walk out, there was another sound outside, which made him stop again. Of course, the flood has already happened. This is irreversible. However, the impact of these natural disasters is not limited to this. Li Yi looked at the Princess Royal and slowly said, after the great disaster, there will be a great epidemic. It must be strictly controlled. Otherwise, it will cause greater harm. Also, how should the refugees who are homeless because of the disaster be settled? If the arrangement is not done properly, it will be used by people with ulterior motives to incite the refugees to rebel. What will the imperial court do? Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing, Prime Minister Qin, and Prime Minister Shen all had a dignified expression on their faces. Li Yi was right. The flood was not the most terrible. The most terrible thing was how to settle the refugees after the flood, how to prevent the outbreak of the epidemic, how to minimize the disaster. Soon, they would face such a problem. If there was a little negligence, there would be great turmoil in the affected area. After the disaster, the plague would be everywhere, the refugees would flee, and incite the refugees to rebel. Such a thing was not unprecedented. Everyone's mood became heavy, because of Li Yi's words. However, at this time the sound outside suddenly became light. Of course these are small things. Li Yi looked at the Princess Royal, smiled and said, epidemic prevention must be done. Don't drink raw water, pay attention to hygiene, and establish epidemic prevention areas. These are actually very simple. I will write an epidemic prevention manual, and you can submit it to His Majesty. As for the proper settlement of the refugees, this is a problem that cannot be taken lightly. If you don't want the refugees to flee everywhere, I'm afraid the national treasury will have to spend some money. Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing finally felt a little relieved. Since he said so, there should be no need to worry about the epidemic. Then his face showed a little annoyance. If he hadn't suddenly thought of it today, he would never know that he hid his talent in front of him, the ruler of a country, and was so calm in front of Emingzu. He had been so fond of him, but in the end, he was not as good as. He suddenly realized that although Li Yi's advice was not directly told to him, the effect was the same. It was just that there was one more person in the middle, one more person that he would never envy or be jealous of. He was worried that if he showed too much, he would be entrusted with important tasks. With his temper, it was not unusual for him to do such a thing. In this case, it is not a bad idea. Emperor Jing's mouth pulled up into a smile, and he immediately had a plan in his heart. He turned his head and continued to listen carefully. Speaking of the silver allocated by the imperial court, you have to pay attention to it. Don't let all the disaster relief funds go into the pockets of those corrupt officials. To be honest, the imperial court is not doing a good job in this regard. Li Yi frowned and said, there needs to be a slight reform here. So, there were actually a lot of problems with the feudal official system, including their way of doing things. Li Yi could not completely overthrow it. He could only use scientific management methods to prevent corruption to the greatest extent. At the same time, he told her how to rebuild after the disaster, how to resettle the victims, and how to reduce the loss. He watched her write them down one by one. There had been no sound outside for a long time. Emperor Jing took a deep breath and stepped out from the back. Speaking of reform, it was rare for Her Royal Highness to study hard today. It was a rare opportunity, so Li Yi decided to talk more. He looked at her and said, in fact, there are many aspects of the imperial court that need to be reformed. Agriculture, tax, imperial examinations, water conservancy, military. What are you looking at? Finding that the eldest princess was staring at something behind him, Li Yi turned his head and looked. There was nothing there. He looked at her and asked in confusion. Nothing. Emingzu withdrew her gaze and shook her head. Listen carefully, don't be distracted. Li Yi looked at her discontentedly and asked, where were we just now? Reform. Yes, reform. Where should I start? Yes, let's start with agriculture. Li Yi nodded and spoke again. The feudal dynasty had gone through thousands of years. The dynasties changed and the country changed. In the long river of history, the spring breeze of reform blew again and again. Of course, it had to be combined with the national conditions at that time, but some places were similar. At present, the various systems of the Jing kingdom were naturally not perfect. All aspects could be reformed, big or small, to make the country rich and the people strong. Li did not want her to change anything. He only hoped that she could remember some of what he said today. In the future, when facing the affairs of the imperial court, she and the officials of the imperial court were at a different level. Reforms or political reforms had always been extremely sensitive. He spoke very carefully, unprecedentedly carefully. What he talked about was also verified by history. When he took it out and put it in the court, he tried his best to avoid some sensitive aspects. He rarely touched the interests of the royal family and certain people. Although there were some small drawbacks, in the general direction, it was beneficial to the country and the people. He must ensure that these words from the mouth of the first princess would not cause too much suspicion and opposition from others. Therefore, he needed to be extra careful. Behind the bushes, Jingdi rubbed his eyebrows. The expression on his face could not be said whether he was happy or angry. He did not understand the imperial court. He did not understand the imperial court. If he did not understand the imperial court, no one in this world would understand the imperial court. He was happy because his talent and ability far exceeded his expectations. To a certain extent, there was such a person who was worthy of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. He was angry because since he had such talent, why did he hide it? If he replaced the position of either of the two prime ministers, He would not have to worry about the imperial court in the future. Prime Minister Qin's body trembled slightly. His old face showed an extremely shocked expression for the first time. Evildoer, evildoer. This person could already be called an evildoer. Prime Minister Shun's face was filled with astonishment and shock. As for the other officials, their expressions were the same. It could even be said that they were terrified. He did not understand the imperial court. He did not understand the imperial court. Thinking of their evaluation of County Marquis Li, his old face could not help but blush. How could they have such qualifications? At this moment, they finally understood why His Majesty insisted on giving that position to him. In the entire imperial court, was there anyone more suitable than him? His Majesty. His Majesty was really His Majesty. Emingzu suddenly regretted it. She knew that Li Yi had never kept anything from her. But he was willing to say these words to her. But it did not mean that he was willing to let others hear it. Don't say it. She stood up and reached out to cover Li Yi's mouth. She whispered, "Don't say it." Li Yi was unprecedentedly focused. His mouth was suddenly covered by Ji Yunshu, and he almost bit his tongue. His eyes widened as he looked at Ji Yunshu, snorted twice, and pushed her hand away. He frowned and said, "What are you doing? Have you washed your hands?" Chapter 780. It was very unhygienic and uncivilized behavior to use one's hand to block other people's mouths. Although she was the Princess Royal and there was a faint fragrance on her hand, Li Yi was not willing to do so. What's more, he had spent so much effort to tell her these historical experiences that were hundreds of thousands of years ahead of the world. They covered a wide range of aspects, which was enough to raise the comprehensive national strength of the Jing Kingdom to a new level. This was a real priceless treasure. With this knowledge, not only could he show his face in the court and in front of the old emperor, but it would also be useful in governing the country in the future. It was so beneficial. It was so disappointing that she was so careless. He had always kept a low profile. He knew so many things, but had he ever publicized it? If it weren't for their pure friendship, he wouldn't have been so devoted to her. If these words were heard by the old emperor, he would not have a good life in the future. Li Yi frowned when he saw that she was staring at something behind him. He said unhappily, "Hey, are you listening to what I'm saying?" The Princess Royal was obviously not listening to him, and her eyes were still looking behind. What is behind? Li Yi was surprised. When he turned his head, he found that it was not something behind him. The expression on his face froze, and he asked in a daze, "Your Majesty, when did you come here?" Emperor Jing looked at him and sneered. "When you said that I was fooling around." "Haha, Your Majesty, you must be joking. I have just arrived." Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing, the two prime ministers and a few important ministers walking out from the back. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I will not disturb Your Majesty and the ministers' discussion. I will take my leave first." When he turned around and walked quickly out of the imperial garden, Changda's annoying face appeared in his eyes at an inopportune time. Li Yi turned back and looked at the Princess Royal. He lowered his head and said nothing. Emingzu was a little flustered by his gaze. She looked away and did not dare to look at him. Emperor Jing looked at the person behind him and asked, "Minister Qi, do you remember what Dr. Li said just now?" The prefectural water minister nodded immediately. "Yes, I understand. But there are still some things I don't understand about the irrigation works," Emperor Jing said faintly. "If there's anything you don't understand, go down and ask yourself." "As you command." Dushui Chief Chung was immediately relieved. With His Majesty's words, he wouldn't continue to hide his abilities, right? "I am a little tired. I will return to the palace." Emperor Jing glanced at Li Yi and walked outside. Halfway through he paused again. Without turning his head, he spoke again. "In the future, when the minister sends the memorials to the palace, send them to the morning dew hall first, and then pass them to me for a look. Changda, make some preparations. I will be going to Hibiscus Garden for a period of time. This palace is really like a cage. I am really getting tired of living here." Emperor Jing did not say anything to Li Yi from the beginning to the end, but these few irrelevant words revealed a lot of information. His Majesty was going to leave the palace. The emperor had many temporary imperial residences, but His Majesty had been diligent in state affairs for more than 20 years, and lived in the palace for a long time. He had never done anything that would waste people and money. This time, although it was only in hibiscus garden outside the palace, it was the first time in decades. In fact, it was against the rules that the Princess Royal would handle the state affairs for him in the future. The emperor was not in the palace, so the only person who could manage the state affairs was the crown prince. Even if there was no crown prince in the Jing kingdom, it should be one of the princes, and it should not be the Princess Royal. However, all the people present were important officials in the court, so no one dared to raise an objection. Speaking of reason, the Prime Minister and the ministers should have handled the affairs of the court perfectly. But all of them added up couldn't even compare to a person's little finger. How could they still have the face to speak of reason? As for persuading His Majesty to take back the title of Marquis of Chang and County, Li, they were too embarrassed to say the reason they just found. Marquis Li was young and did not understand state affairs? If Marquis Li did not understand state affairs, what were they? Did they live like dogs all these years? Emperor Jing left, and so did the officials. When Prime Minister Qin left, he looked at Li Yi with a very meaningful look. He said a lot just now, and Prime Minister Qin also remembered a lot. However, he knew that what he heard was just the tip of the iceberg. Regardless of whether what he said was applicable to the current situation or not, it was enough for him to pay more attention to County Marquis Li since he had such insight that even he was far inferior to. In his heart, Prime Minister Qin faintly felt that some of what Li Yi said coincided with some hazy and unformed ideas in his heart. When the officials left, they looked at him as if they were looking at a monster. If he was only a little better than ordinary people, he could be described as a talented young hero. But if he was so much better than ordinary people, he could only be described as a monster. At this time, thinking about it again, the scene in the court where many officials strongly advised His Majesty to take back the title of Marquis Li was a little ridiculous. A Marquis Li was desired by countless people, but he did not care at all. A group of clowns. Well done. After so many years, His Majesty should have a good rest. You young people should make progress. Before Changde left, he patted him on the shoulder and showed a rare smile on his old face. Not long after, in the Imperial Garden, except for the two guards in the distance, there were only two people left. Li stared at the dense shadows of the trees in a daze. He felt that he had been betrayed. He had been betrayed by the person he trusted the most, the person he had never suspected. The old emperor, and those people were behind. She knew that they were behind. She knew that she did not want more people to hear these words, but she still did it. It would be a lie to say that he was not disappointed. Not only was he disappointed, he was even a little disheartened. From a long time ago, he had started to do things for her. At first, he had no choice but to hand Tianfa over to her. But later, he produced dramas, helped her build momentum, established the women's union, changed the marriage laws, promoted the correct method of midwifery, made her the support of all the women in the capital and even the world, established a women's college, new military provisions, helped her establish a close relationship with the family of generals, and recently established the Emingzu Academy to help her win the hearts of the world's scholars. And what he had said just now could make the old emperor and all the officials look at her in a different light, all without asking for anything in return. Not asking for anything in return did not mean that he did not want her to care about him. At this moment, some of the beliefs in his heart were shaken. He sighed and did not say anything. He turned and walked out of the Imperial Garden. Emingzu looked up and saw the desolate look on his face. Her heart seemed to be squeezed tightly. Her face revealed a bewildered expression. Listening to the footsteps getting further and further away, it seemed as if something extremely important to her had also left with it. Almost instantly, her figure disappeared from where she stood. Just as he was about to reach the entrance of the Imperial Garden, he heard hurried footsteps coming from behind him. They were getting closer and closer, and then they slowed down. Li stopped and turned around. He still wanted to hear an explanation. But there was no explanation. The eldest princess stood behind him. She looked up at Li Yi. her face filled with a sense of helplessness and confusion that he had never seen before. Very quickly, the confusion on her face disappeared. She took a deep breath, took a step forward, stood on her tiptoes, and pressed her soft lips against his face. "I'm sorry." Li Yi was stunned and looked at her in a daze. At this moment, he felt like he had been electrocuted. Li Yi seemed to have been electrocuted. Not far in front of him, 2 palace guards had already been struck by lightning. After a moment of shock, one of the guards looked up at the sky and sighed. "The sun today is so poisonous." The other guard nodded in agreement. He closed his eyes and murmured, "Yes, it's so piercing that I can't see." Chapter 781. Li Yi stood there in a daze, unable to regain his senses for a long time. He touched his face. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but his face was still warm. He looked at the eldest princess in disbelief. "Before you came, father and the other officials were already here." Emingzu looked at him. She had regained her composure and explained, "I hinted at you at first, but you didn't take it to heart. After that, I didn't stop them. I'm sorry." Li Yi stared at her. Was it the main point that the old emperor was eavesdropping behind the bushes? Was it the main point that she didn't tell him that there was someone behind the bushes? The old emperor gave her the authority on the surface, but he was secretly forcing him to give in. Was that the main point? Not at all. The main point was that I treated you as a friend, but you actually. Li Yi waved his hand. He stared at her and said, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this first. You just now nothing happened." Emingzi looked at him and said through gritted teeth. She turned and walked out of the imperial garden. Her expression was very calm, but her fists, which were hidden in her sleeves, were tightly clenched. In fact, in that instant, her mind had gone blank for a moment. She didn't know what to say, so she had subconsciously done that. Only after a moment did she realize how abrupt and bold her actions had been. Li looked at her back for a long time. He said loudly, "Hey, don't think that this matter is over. You didn't even ask for my opinion." "Hey, stop right there, hey." The eldest princess's figure quickly disappeared from his sight. Li walked out of the imperial garden gloomily. The 2 palace guards were still looking up at the sky. They dared to look at the glaring sun. Were they not afraid of being blinded? "What is the meaning of this?" he murmured. The princess, who was always calm and rational, this time. Why didn't she play her cards according to the norm? He hadn't sorted out the matters at home, so he couldn't make any more trouble. But what was with that little bit of joy in his heart? Li shook his head and came to a conclusion in his heart. Eating from a bowl, and looking into the pot, and still thinking about the rice that was not in the pot. Men, indeed, none of them were good people. In recent days, there were always some unexpected things happening. Today could be considered a very unexpected situation. Fortunately, the old emperor did not intend to use him as a permanent laborer. Instead, it was a blessing in disguise. The eldest princess had advanced a step further, and was now able to directly participate in the affairs of the court. Although it was only temporary, and the old emperor still had the intention of forcing him to submit, this was already a great improvement. Li also felt that it was time for the old emperor to let go of these things, and think about how to live out his remaining years. Opportunities should always be left to the young. As he walked out of the palace, the old emperor who was squatting under the tree stood. He was surprised, and said, "You?" Li sighed and said, "Sigh, it's a long story. Let me be alone. Let's go home." Inexplicably, he had become the minister of the imperial court. Inexplicably, he had been eavesdropped by the old emperor, and inexplicably, he had lost a pure and innocent friendship. He really needed some time to calm down. The sloppy old man looked at him and nodded in the end, not saying a word. In the imperial garden. "Did I see wrongly just now?" One of the guards whispered, his tone filled with disbelief. The other guard nodded and said, "No, you didn't see wrongly." The 2 of them looked at each other and were about to speak again when they saw a figure in front of them. Their faces suddenly paled. Emingzi looked at the 2 of them and asked indifferently, "What did you see just now?" "We didn't see anything just now." The 2 of them looked serious and said, "The sun is too strong. We didn't hear or see anything. After a while, a voice finally came from the other side. From today onwards, the two of you will be working at the Morning Dew Hall. The new residence was not far from the Imperial Palace. The carriage soon stopped in front of the residence. Li Yi jumped out of the carriage. Feng happened to walk out from inside and said in surprise, "Young master, you're back. I heard that you've been conferred the title of minister. Is it a very high position?" "Isu." Li Yi waved his hand and walked into the courtyard. Feng stepped out of the door and suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned his head and said, "Young master. What's the matter? Let's talk later." Li Yi had already seen Mississippi Lu in the courtyard. Thinking of what happened in the morning, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He waved his hand to the back. The most important thing was to confirm whether Mississippi Lu was bewitched. He didn't have the mood to talk to Feng about anything else. At the entrance of the courtyard, Feng stared at his back with wide eyes. "I'm back." When Li Yi walked past Mississippi Lu, he stopped and said softly. Second Miss Lu glanced at him, stood up and asked, "What did you do this morning?" Seeing her attitude, Li Yi was relieved. Although she asked him an extra question for the first time, her attitude was cold and she didn't show that kind of smile. It seemed that there was no need to disturb old Taoist Yuan's cultivation. "I went to the morning court. After the morning court, I talked with Princess Royal about the state affairs. I came back after that." "That's all?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Is there nothing else?" "Nothing else." Li Yi nodded. He was slightly not used to Mississippi Lu's sudden concern for him. However, it felt quite good. It was like a spring breeze, silently moisturizing everything. Since there's nothing else. "Mississippi." Lu looked at him and said lightly, "Then can you explain where the lipstick mark on your face came from?" The spring breeze turned into the east wind. It was like a knife blowing on people's bodies, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. Li Yi's heart sank. He thought to himself, "Oh no, I was confused by Princess Royal just now, and I actually made such a serious mistake. It was originally a kiss of friendship as pure as a little white flower, but when she asked, it immediately changed its meaning." Of course, he couldn't tell her the truth. Li Yi's mind turned quickly. He smiled and said, "When I came back from the palace today, I met Shanning." "Sir, you're back." The proud Lolita walked out of the backyard and said in surprise. Li Yi looked at her blankly and asked, Why are you here?" The proud Lolita said pitifully, "I still have class in the afternoon. I don't want to go back to the palace, so I came here. I want to eat your cooking." Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi and asked, "What happened to Shanning?" Li Yi turned his head, looked at her and said slowly, "I just came out of the palace and met Shanning's sister." "Does this have anything to do with the lipstick mark on your face?" Li Yi looked at her with a puzzled face and asked, "Yes, does it have anything to do with it?" The two looked at each other for a long, long time. Mississippi Lu's eyes were the same as before. Li Yi lowered his head and said, It's really a misunderstanding. I can explain." Outside the door. "Son-in-law is really amazing." Feng leaned against the wall and sighed from the bottom of his heart. Since he knew the son-in-law, he admired a lot of things the son-in-law had done, but he had to say that this time, he was really convinced. The sloppy old man nodded and agreed with this. Feng looked at him and said in surprise, "Why are you nodding? You've never married." The sloppy old man was startled. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He put his arm around his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Little Feng, this old man has made a breakthrough in martial arts recently. Come here, this old man has a unique skill to teach you." Chapter 782. Come here. Seeing Feng coming over from a distance, Li Yi said angrily with a sullen face. Feng came over with a defeated look. Li Yi looked at him and said one word. Suddenly he said in surprise, What happened to your butt?" Only then did he find that Feng's walking posture was a little strange, and his butt was more than a circle bigger than usual. Feng lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I accidentally fell when I was walking." Not to mention one fall, even 10 falls or 100 falls wouldn't have such an effect. Li Yi had a deep understanding of this, so he didn't expose him. He asked, Why didn't you remind me when you saw it just now? Fong raised his head and looked at him in confusion. What did you see? Li Yi raised his hand and pointed to his cheek. Fong suddenly realized and said, I wanted to say it just now, but you said to talk about it later. I thought you did it on purpose. On purpose what? Fong looked at him and said with reverence, You deliberately annoyed the second Mississippi. What do you call this? Loosening the reins in order to advance by retreating? Leaving a woman's kiss mark on his face, giving the illusion that the son-in-law is with someone outside. Well, it's not an illusion. Anyway, it's deliberately provoking the second miss to make her feel a sense of crisis, so that she will become more active. Is that right? This was the conclusion he came to after thinking about it. He only felt that the son-in-law had reached an unfathomable realm that he was far from reaching. Especially when the second miss saw that there was another woman's lip mark on his face, he felt that the son-in-law's realm was even deeper now that he could still stand here and talk to him. Imagine if it was him who had a woman's lip mark on his face. It was simply unimaginable. Fong looked at Li Yi, thought for a moment and said, However, this method can only be used once. If it is used too often, it will have the opposite effect. With second Mrs. Temper, if she is provoked too much. You know, son-in-law. Also, when you come back from Miss Zhang's place, you'd better look at yourself in the mirror to see if there's anything messy on your face and neck. Sometimes, it's useless to look at yourself in the mirror because your body will smell fragrant. You should take a bath and change your clothes. Or, you might as well prepare a new set of clothes. You can change into them when you go there, and change back when you come back. That way, there won't be any other smell. This is just a bit of experience. Young master, please think about it yourself. I still have to go to the shops in the city. Li Yi stared blankly at Fong's back as he left. He suddenly had a feeling that things remained the same, but people had changed. The simple and honest voice and appearance were still there, but old Third Fong was nowhere to be seen. From Qing and prefecture to the capital, it had only been a little more than a year. Fong was no longer the Fong of the past. Just now, Mississippi Lu left without listening to his explanation, which made Li Yi even more perturbed. The old emperor was about to move out of the palace and live in Hibiscus Garden. At that time, the eldest princess would naturally leave the palace often. Hibiscus Garden was not far from here, so there would be plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. What if Mississippi Lu fought with her when they met? At that time, who should he help? It was wrong to help anyone. It was useless to help anyone. The main culprit of all this was the eldest princess, who had suddenly changed inexplicably. If she wanted to apologize, then apologize properly. Why did she kiss her? She left after kissing her, and said that nothing had happened. He was a dignified county marquis, the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom, and Dr. Lu. Was he such a casual person? Was he someone who could casually accept a kiss from a woman? The proud Lolita held Yongning's hand and jogged over from behind. She asked excitedly again. Teacher, if father really wants to leave the palace and live in Hibiscus Garden, can we not return to the palace in the future? Li nodded. If he doesn't agree, you can just act coquettishly. Isn't that enough? The proud Lolita blushed and hugged his arm. She twisted her body and said coquettishly, but I don't know how to act coquettishly. Hearing her voice, Li felt his bones soften. He bent over and picked Yongning up. He frowned and said, Why have you become so light recently? Did you not eat properly? The young girl shook her head violently and immediately said, No, Yongning is very obedient. She eats properly every time. Good girl. Li patted her head. Good girl, do you want to give your brother a kiss? Yongning's little face was blushing as she pressed her lips against the side of his face. The proud Lolita bared her fangs and brandished her claws, shouting that teacher could not be biased. It was the first time in recent months that the morning court was held for 2 days in a row. Before the morning court, many officials were wondering if His Majesty's body was fine. Was he going to return to the previous situation of the morning court? Only a few people knew that after today's morning court, they would not have to come here for a long time. The first thing that His Majesty announced was related to the flood control. What was strange was that the matter that had been discussed by the court officials yesterday, and had not come to a conclusion, had already come to a conclusion today. The imperial court sent another flood control official from the Imperial Navy. At the same time, 4 imperial physicians from the Imperial Physician Bureau accompanied him. They urgently transferred 300,000 taels of silver from the Ministry of Revenue and rushed to the disaster area. In recent months, His Majesty was very generous. In the past, when he transferred money from the National Treasury, he had to go through a series of procedures, and it was extremely difficult. However, these days, the National Treasury seemed to be full, and the allocation of funds was straightforward and decisive, which surprised many people. The flood control did not give the officials time to discuss and pass quickly. Next, a eunuch officially announced that Li Yi, the Marquis of Chang'an County, had made great contributions to the country, had the talent to govern the country, and was conferred the title of Honorable Minister of Gold and Purple Ribbon. Regarding this matter, His Majesty said yesterday that it would be discussed later, but today, he made a decision without discussing it. Of course, the imperial court was in an uproar again, just like yesterday. Not to mention the great contributions, Li Yi, the Marquis of Chang'an County, had indeed made great contributions to the country, but to say that he had the talent to govern the country and the way to stabilize the country was pure nonsense. How could a young man in his early 20s, who had never really entered the imperial court and had never put forward any meaningful political opinions, be qualified to receive the special honor that most civil officials could not pursue in their lifetime? Your Majesty, this is absolutely not appropriate. This is a serious matter, Your Majesty. Please think twice. How can Li Yi be qualified? Your Majesty, you must not spoil him too much. Seeing that many officials stood out, Emperor Jing gestured for them to calm down. After the imperial court quieted down, he looked in a certain direction and asked, Minister Su, what do you think? As soon as he finished speaking, a white-haired old man came out of the crowd, and all the officials made way for him. Lord Su was a veteran of 3 dynasties and had been in politics for decades. He was devoted to the country and had a high prestige in the imperial court. Yesterday, he was the one who firmly opposed His Majesty's decision. Many people suddenly felt relieved. It seemed that His Majesty had considered the opinions of these old officials. They were insignificant, and His Majesty would not ignore Lord Su's words, would he? The people who stood out to oppose instantly felt that they had a backbone. The old man walked out of the crowd and bowed, saying, Although Marquis Li is young, he is a hero of his generation. Your Majesty, you have a discerning eye, and you have obtained the pillar of the country. I congratulate Your Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. The old man stood in front of the crowd, and the officials behind him who had firmly opposed this matter just now froze. Their eyes were full of doubts and puzzlement. Had Lord Su become muddle-headed? Hadn't he firmly opposed this matter yesterday? It had only been a day. How could he change his opinion so completely? What about your integrity as an old official of 3 dynasties? This was not right. Chapter 783. After Lord Su spoke, Emperor Jing nodded and looked to the other side. Minister Wei? A middle-aged man came out, bowed and said, I congratulate Your Majesty. This was a minister in charge of reviewing and refuting the emperor's edict. He had the power to return the emperor's edict and reject the memorials of the officials. Among the 4 ministers in charge of the emperor's edict, Lord Wei was the one that His Majesty valued the most. Emperor Jing turned his eyes again. Minister Yang? A Run Huang of the Secretariat, who had been valued recently, stood out and said loudly, I congratulate Your Majesty. Emperor Jing looked to the front. Prime Minister Shen raised his head and said with a smile, Your Majesty is wise. The originally noisy imperial court gradually quietened down as several high-ranking officials spoke one after another. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The officials that His Majesty had just named were all important officials who had great power in the court. They had no personal relationship with County Marquis Li. Yesterday they did not agree with His Majesty's reward for County Marquis Li. But today, what happened to them? The officials who were opposed to this matter and planned to wait and see immediately gave up some ideas. To be able to change the minds of these court officials, there must be an inside story to this matter. And more than a dozen people who were sharp and strongly opposed to this matter just now stood there in a daze. At this moment, they finally felt a kind of feeling called loneliness and loneliness. At this moment, Emperor Jing looked down and said again, "Where is Minister Qin?" More than a dozen people heard this and were all shocked. They looked in a certain direction at the same time. Yes, Prime Minister Qin. They still had Prime Minister Qin. No matter what, Prime Minister Qin was on their side. At this moment, they no longer hoped that His Majesty could change his decision. They only hoped that there could be a leader who could be their backer and help them withstand the pressure from other officials. Prime Minister Qin looked a little absent-minded. After leaving the palace yesterday, he directly returned to the mansion and repeatedly thought about what Li Yi said. He didn't see any guests and he didn't sleep for a whole night. Until this morning, some ideas about the state affairs that were very vague in his mind were clear enough to appear on the paper. He raised his head and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "Your Majesty is wise." More than a dozen people behind him looked at him in a daze. There seemed to be thunder dancing in their minds. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Qin. What are you talking about? The Marquis of Chang, and County, Li Yi, and the King of Shu were like fire and water. Anything that was beneficial to him in the imperial court, they would definitely stop it. Didn't Prime Minister Qin's words make him a traitor? They were starting to get a little blurry. The two prime ministers, as well as several high-ranking officials of the imperial court, spoke in unison and finally set the tone for this matter. There was no longer any opposition in the imperial court. The attitude of these ministers, including Prime Minister Qin, naturally made everyone suspicious. However, at this moment it was not appropriate for them to ask. As for the others, they were not just suspicious. The change in attitude of several ministers and Prime Minister Qin's position made them into clowns in the court today. Their outlook on life and the world collapsed, and they began to gradually reflect on the position they stood in. He was the youngest minister since the founding of the country, and the most favored minister of His Majesty. At least, when the country was still under His Majesty's control, making an enemy of him was tantamount to asking for humiliation. At that time he, who had made enemies in almost every corner of the court, would not have a good ending. Ministers who were favored by the emperor had never had a good ending. However, they soon realized that it would not take a few years, a few months, a few days, or even less than a few hours. The day they had been waiting for had arrived. After Li Yi was conferred the title of Minister of Jinzi Guanglu, His Majesty announced one thing. Because His Majesty was ill and needed to recuperate, the morning court would be suspended indefinitely, and he would move to the temporary imperial residence in Hibiscus Garden. The affairs of the court would still be led by the two prime ministers. At this time His Majesty did not summon the King of Shu back to the capital. Above the two prime ministers, the one who decided the affairs of the court was not a certain prince, but the eldest princess. This really did not make sense. The eldest princess often participated in the affairs of the court, such as promoting the new marriage law, the establishment of the women's college, and the matter of the academy a few days ago. In fact, if it had been a year ago, these things would still have been inconceivable to them. The harem was not allowed to interfere in the affairs of the court, not even the eldest princess. This was an ancestral rule. However, in this year, too many things had happened in the capital. Their thoughts and views had also changed accordingly. Now that they thought about it, they still did not understand how the eldest princess had gotten to where she was today, step by step. This seemed impossible, but it was already the truth. And now, she had taken another big step forward. This was the regent, the princess regent. This was unprecedented and extremely absurd. For the time being, no one in the court had spoken, because they were waiting for others to speak. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Shen, the various officials of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries, they would not agree. They would not allow such an absurd thing to happen. This was not proper at all. However, the reality surprised them once again. The scene of the ministers collectively remonstrating to the death did not happen. Even the imperial censors collectively fell silent, as if they had reached some kind of tacit agreement before the morning court. Regarding this matter, only a few scattered officials spoke. It seemed that they had not expected the situation in the court to be like this. They spoke very tactfully, and then returned to their seats. Another major innovation that had not been done since the founding of the country was born in His Majesty's hands. Some officials who thought that they had waited until spring found in despair that this year's winter seemed to be colder than before. His Majesty at most favored County Marquis Lee. As a ruler, a wise ruler, he had the most basic bottom line. However, the eldest princess, in the entire court, who did not know the relationship between County Marquis Lee and the eldest princess. The two of them had known each other in Qing and Prefecture. Tianfa was created by County Marquis Lee, but it was the eldest princess who presented it to His Majesty. It was said that when the eldest princess concealed her identity to be a constable in Qing and Prefecture, County Marquis Lee was a county lieutenant, who knew what was going on between the male superior and the female subordinate. Moreover, after coming to the capital, the relationship between the two was even more obvious to everyone. They were both the three heroes of the capital. When the officials went up and down the court, they often saw the two appear together. After the establishment of the academy, the Women's Academy was established. The two academies were adjacent to each other, and both of them were the heads of the academies. To say something inappropriate, County Marquis Lee and the eldest princess were basically wearing the same pair of pants. Thinking of these things, when some officials walked out of the hall, they felt that the sunny sky outside had become gray. Fortunately, the eldest princess was only acting as the representative of the court. If His Majesty appointed other princes, they would be suspicious and frightened. However, the eldest princess was a princess after all. No matter how outstanding she was, no matter how much His Majesty valued her, she was only a woman. As long as she was a woman, she could never threaten that position. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, they had never thought about that matter. At this time, as the officials walked out of the hall, some gossip finally came out from some people. It was said that after the court ended yesterday, when His Majesty, the two prime ministers, and several important officials discussed the state affairs in the Imperial Garden, County Marquis Lee and the eldest princess were also present. At that time, on the state affairs, the two of them showed talents that shocked and even convinced the emperor and several officials. Just now Lord Su said that he was an outstanding talent of the generation and the pillar of the country, which was the reason. And Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Shen, and other officials did not oppose it, which was probably the same reason. Lord Su and Prime Minister Qin were both elders of the imperial court, with decades of political experience. The person that could shock and convince them. Everyone couldn't help but wonder again. Did County Marquis Lee really have the talent to govern the country, and the way to govern the country, as the imperial edict said? Thinking of what happened in the court just now, they didn't doubt it anymore. After all, the attitudes of the two prime ministers and the ministers could not have changed so quickly. His Majesty also had no reason to suddenly announce that the eldest princess would temporarily take charge of the state affairs. The only explanation was that they were really like what the rumors said. Their views and methods on state affairs had convinced the people present and made His Majesty completely relieved, so he decided to temporarily let go of the state affairs. Thus the officials, including the two prime ministers, didn't oppose His Majesty's decision at all. Thinking of their ages, many people sighed dejectedly on the way out of the court. A pair of evildoers. As officials in the same imperial court, it was inevitable that they would compare with each other, but the result was really despairing. Chapter 784. When it was late July, the weather started to turn cold. News came from the south that the flood had subsided, and the flood was temporarily eliminated. The officials sent by the imperial court strictly followed the regulations issued by the imperial court. They built temporary residences and settled down the victims. Every day, they provided porridge and rice. There was no large-scale civil unrest. As for the epidemic after the disaster, there was also no outbreak. There were many cases of diarrhea, but it was quickly controlled and did not worsen further. Although the post-disaster reconstruction work still needed a long time, the impact of the flood this time was indeed much smaller than before. It did not affect the hearts of the officials so much. The scale of the emperor's relocation from the palace was very large. It lasted for a few days. The empress and a few favored concubines in the harem also followed him to live in Hibiscus Garden. Of course, the imperial court continued to operate as usual. Some important political matters, after being reviewed by the two prime ministers, would be sent to the palace and handed over to the eldest princess to make a decision. If the three provinces had no objections to the eldest princess's decision, it would be carried out. If there was a huge disagreement, the memorial would be sent to Hibiscus Garden for the emperor to make the final decision. Of course, until now, no one questioned any of the princess's decisions. In just a few days, some officials completely understood why the emperor would make such a seemingly ridiculous decision. A problem that the minister could not solve was sent to the eldest princess. Within a day, she would get a perfect solution. Other than being amazed, it also made many people feel ashamed. Evildoer. There was really an evildoer in this dynasty. The eldest princess was busy, so Li naturally had nothing to do. Rui's due date was early November. It was only about 3 months from now. Even though she was a grandmaster, she was still protected tightly. In case of an accident, she was not allowed to leave the mansion. Anyway, the house was big enough. There were mountains and rivers, and the scenery was not bad. It was a good place to have a baby. It was not enough to have Xiao Huan to take care of her. Mississippi Lu had not gone out for many days. She stayed at home and occupied Rui. At night, Li would also be driven out by her. The space in the inner house was not big. It was specially arranged by Li according to the layout of the Willow Leaves village. She drove him out and did not allow him to sleep in her room. Li had only 2 choices. One was to make do with Xiao Huan, and the other was to sleep in the outer house. The former was almost ruled out by him without hesitation. Xiao Huan was no longer the young and inexperienced girl she used to be. She had not fully matured yet. The night was long, and Li did not want to make himself suffer. They were now inseparable from Rui. The familiar women of Willow Village often came to talk to him, but they had to avoid talking to him. Li felt that he was redundant. He lay in the yard, basking in the sun and drinking tea. This was the ideal retirement life. After calming down, he had enough time to think about some things. Since a long time ago, he had been laying the foundation for the eldest princess. Now he had finally seen some results. The next thing to do was to wait. Many things needed enough time to ferment if they wanted to achieve the desired effect. Although no matter what kind of preparation they had made, the final decision was still in the hands of the old emperor. But when her weight in the court became more and more important, to the point of breaking through a certain critical point, it was possible to break some conventional ideas. As for the King of Shu did not have to worry at all. The person involved could not see clearly. Perhaps only those who were in the same boat as him would use self-hypnosis to deceive themselves when they had no other choice. With the old emperor's temper, it was impossible for him to watch the imperial power fall into the hands of an idiot. Otherwise, he would not have made so many moves against the Cui family. Not to mention the other princes, even compared to Li Han, the King of Shu did not have any advantages. Think about it, more than a year ago, he was still the most powerful prince in the capital city. It was really not easy for him to get to where he was today step by step. Lying comfortably on the rocking chair, he was in a state of relaxation. Just when he felt a little sleepy, he was awakened by the sound of hurried footsteps. Fong rushed in from outside and said, "Young master, bad news." "What's the matter?" Li Yi sat up from the rocking chair and asked. Fong handed something to Li Yi and said, "Young master, take a look at it yourself." It was a greeting card. Greeting cards were usually given to strangers or strangers who were not that familiar with one another. He had received many such greeting cards in the past, but this time it was different. Li Yi put down the card and asked with confusion on his face, "Where is she now?" "In the front hall." "Let's go." Li Yi pondered for a moment before walking out of the room. He slowly walked to the front hall, stepped into the hall, and cupped his hands to an old man who was sitting inside drinking tea. "Prime Minister Qin is busy with official business. How do you have time to come here today?" He did not say anything like, "I'm sorry for not coming out to meet you," or "Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling." There was a clear sense of alienation in his words. Prime Minister Qin actually handed over a visiting card and personally came to visit, which was naturally beyond Li Yi's expectations. No matter what, he and the Qin family and Prime Minister Qin had an irreconcilable and antagonistic relationship. Prime Minister Qin had invited him once, but they parted on bad terms in the end. This time he actually came in person. "Dr. Li, please don't blame me for coming rashly." The old man put down the teacup, stood up and said, "Last time in the Imperial Garden, Dr. Li talked about the tax reform. This old man still has some things that I don't understand, so I specially came to explain. I hope Dr. Li will not be stingy with your guidance," he said Dr. Li in a calm tone, as if he had completely ignored Li Yi's age. As a veteran of 3 dynasties, there were not many people in the entire court who could be treated like this by him. Li Yi's gaze stopped on Prime Minister Qin's face for a moment, then he nodded and said, "I don't dare to give advice, just treat it as an exchange. Prime Minister Qin, please sit down." Prime Minister Qin nodded, sat down again and said straightforwardly, "The tax system of this dynasty mostly follows the previous dynasty, but at the end of the previous dynasty, there were many military towns, and they refused to obey the court, so the tax system introduced is not suitable for this dynasty. Although there have been several reforms in the past few decades, this old man thinks that the current tax system still has great defects." Today's conversation was completely different from the one in the Qin mansion. Prime Minister Qin seemed to have completely forgotten his position, and the questions he asked were all about the tax law and economic reform that Li Yi talked about in the Imperial Garden that day. In the process of their conversation, Li Yi unexpectedly found that Prime Minister Qin also had a deep understanding of this. Although some parts were still very vague, the general direction was correct. He even filled in many details that Li Yi did not mention that day. Li Yi could see that these things were not put forward in a day. In other words, he had been exploring these things that were suitable for the current system reform of the Jing Kingdom, for a long time. However, due to limited knowledge before this, he only had hazy ideas, but at this time, these ideas had gradually begun to surface. Li Yi was very clear that for people in this era, it was very rare to be able to think of those things that were ahead of time. Moreover, his understanding of the Jing Kingdom was far beyond his imagination, and his words often hit the nail on the head and hit the nail on the head. Li Yi seemed to have always underestimated this old man. After offending the prime minister of a country, he had always been prepared to accept the other party's revenge, and had several sets of plans to deal with it. However, Qin Yu had suffered losses time and time again, and the king of Shu had gradually lost power. Prime Minister Qin had never taken any action against him. This was not common sense, and Li Yi could not figure out the reason, let alone see through Prime Minister Qin. Including today, when he took the initiative to visit, he did not talk about grievances, and only talked about state affairs, which made Li Yi have a new understanding of the old man in front of him. Chapter 785. About 10 years ago, this old man realized that there was a huge problem with the tax system of our dynasty. After writing the last page, Prime Minister Qin put down his pen and stopped writing. He raised his head and said, "In the past 10 years, I've pushed for tax reform several times, but all of them ended in failure. In the end, I was too embarrassed to mention this matter to His Majesty. I just had some vague thoughts that I didn't dare to bring up. These days, I've been thinking about what you said in the Imperial Garden that day. If you were born 10 years earlier, 5 years ago, if I could hear what you said, there wouldn't be so many twists and turns in the Imperial Court and the people these years." Prime Minister Qin looked at Li Yi and said calmly, "Lord Su is right. You're the hero of your generation. I am not as good as you." Li Yi didn't be modest and didn't continue because Prime Minister Qin obviously had something else to say. "You're unparalleled in poetry and painting. You've reached the peak of calligraphy. You're proficient in torture and business. You created Tian Fa, offered horseshoes, repelled the enemy, started arithmetic and got rid of vermin." Prime Minister Qin seemed to be very familiar with Li Yi's past. "I also know that you've turned the Qi kingdom upside down. The crown prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are fighting fiercely for the throne. The imperial court is unstable and people are anxious. You've made countless contributions to our Jing kingdom. When I was your age, I didn't pass the imperial examinations and was still worried about my future. But you have already been conferred the title of Duke and Marquis, and you are the youngest minister in history. No wonder His Majesty favors you. Being praised by an elder, Li Yi blushed slightly and felt a little embarrassed. It turned out that he was so outstanding. He couldn't see it usually. But you are too young. Prime Minister Qin looked at him with a serious expression and said, "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. Since ancient times, the favored officials of the emperor rarely have good endings. Moreover, do you know whose interests will be lost in the end with those reforms you mentioned? The old emperor's greatest enemy was some of the major clans. The measures he proposed naturally wouldn't let those people have an easy time. If not for this, the old emperor would not have trusted Emingzu to handle the state affairs. Your existence is the blessing of His Majesty, the blessing of the people." Prime Minister Qin stood up, looked at him and said, "I hope you can remember what I said today." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Why?" What he said was naturally from the standpoint of the two of them. Prime Minister Qin had no reason to say such words to him, nor did he have any obligation to do so. Why did he say these words today? I am the master of the Qin family, the Prime Minister of the Jing Kingdom, the Prime Minister of His Majesty, the Prime Minister of the people. If this reform can be carried out smoothly, the country will be rich, the people will be strong, and the people will live in peace. Prime Minister Qin looked at him deeply, cupped his hands and bowed deeply. This bow, on behalf of all the civil and military officials in the court, on behalf of the people of the Jing Kingdom. It was already too late for Li Yi to dodge. In reality, by the time he reacted, Prime Minister Qin had already straightened his body and was walking out the door with large strides. At the door, a certain Water Bureau official who had just been brought in by Fong stood in a daze. He rubbed his eyes and after confirming it, he couldn't help but be petrified on the spot. When Li Yi walked out of the mansion, a carriage had already started off into the distance. He looked in a certain direction for a long time, and began to understand why those old stubborn people in the court were so stubborn. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Qin was Prime Minister Qin, and the Qin family was the Qin family. After a while he turned his head to look at the Water Bureau official behind him and asked, "What is the matter, Junior Supervisor Su?" The official looked in a certain direction, swallowed a few times, and then said, "Concerning the compilation of the commentary on the Water Classic, Minister Chang had me ask Lord Li, Duke Chen Fu. You said that Prime Minister Qin went to the Li Fu yesterday, and even bowed to that Li Yi?" Chen Chong looked at the official in front of him and frowned. "Are you sure you didn't see wrong?" The official shook his head with a bitter smile. "It shouldn't be wrong. The news came from the Water Bureau. It said that the junior supervisor of the Water Bureau saw it with his own eyes. This lowly official investigated this morning. Yesterday Prime Minister Qin did indeed go to that place." "Prime Minister Qin? What is he doing?" Chen Chong frowned. Although they all belonged to the King of Shu's faction, in terms of division, they and Prime Minister Qin did not belong to the same camp. The group of civil officials led by Prime Minister Qin and the officials and nobles led by the Cui and Chen families had the same goals, but they almost never interfered with each other. Moreover, Prime Minister Qin had a high position and great power. His thoughts were hard to guess. The power in the court that leaned towards the King of Shu was already far from what it was in the past. Could it be that even Prime Minister Qin below, the Assistant Minister of Revenue, Sing Shichen, thought for a moment and said, "This matter may not be as the rumors say. County Marquis Li is a minister of golden honor. It is not impossible for Prime Minister Qin to find him to discuss court affairs." Chen Chong raised his eyes and said, "Is there a need to bow when discussing state affairs?" The hall immediately became silent. After a long time, an official sighed and said, "His Majesty temporarily released court affairs. For Her Highness, it was originally a great opportunity. She could have used this opportunity to return to the capital and take charge of court affairs. But who would have thought that His Majesty would completely entrust court affairs to the eldest princess? Our petitions to summon Her Highness back to the capital have all been rejected by His Majesty. Her Highness's situation in court is becoming worse and worse. If this continues, I'm afraid. Chen Chong nodded and said, the most important thing right now is to have Her Highness return to the capital. Tell me, what methods do you have? The few people thought for a moment, and then began to speak. Noble Consort Chui's birthday is approaching. His Majesty places great importance on filial piety. It is reasonable for Her Highness to return to the capital at that time. After Her Highness's birthday, we can think of a way to have Her Highness stay. We can say that she is ill and stay. At that time, we can unite the court officials and ask His Majesty to have Her Highness replace the eldest princess in governing. This method is feasible. What does Minister think? Chen Chong nodded. Just as he was about to speak, someone walked in from outside and said in a small voice, Second Master, Miss has returned from visiting her family. Hearing this, Chen Chong's face immediately lit up. He stood up and waved his hand at the people. I have important matters to attend to right now. We will discuss Her Highness's return to the capital later. Finishing, he hurriedly left, completely ignoring the stunned expressions on the faces of the people in the hall. Everyone watched as he quickly left, their hearts like 10,000 horses galloping. What matter could be more important than this? Didn't he just say that the most important thing right now was to have Her Highness return to the capital? In the garden of the Chun estate, Chen Chong looked at the white-haired woman and asked with a smile, How is it? Is Aunt well? The white-haired woman nodded and said, Her body has always been healthy. She even asked about Big Brother and Second Brother. She turned her head to look in a certain direction and said, Second Brother still has matters to attend to. The Lord seemed to be waiting over there. It's all a small matter. It's not important. Let them wait for a while. Chen Chong waved his hand and said, Third sister, your birthday is approaching. How do you want to celebrate it? Tell Second Brother and Second Brother will help you. The white-haired woman shook her head and said, Birthdays have to be celebrated every year. Second Brother doesn't need to make such a big fuss. It's enough for our family to be together. Chen Chong hurriedly waved his hand. No, birthdays only happen once a year. It has to be celebrated. It has to be celebrated. Chapter 786. Rui's position in the family was unquestionably the most important. The two old madams treated her like a treasure, and the women in the family usually surrounded her. On the contrary, they were guarding against him as if he was a thief. Today, the old madam took her to the old house, saying that she would let the ancestors of the Li family see her, and ask them to bless her. Li let them go. Mississippi Liu and Xiao Huan also went, leaving him alone in the house. Li walked out of the room and saw the sloppy old man and Fong sitting cross-legged in the yard. The two of them had been inseparable recently. Every day, they would sit cross-legged and motionless under the sun for a few hours. Li even wondered if there was some kind of martial art that could make people photosynthesize like plants and increase their power. He walked to the porch. The sloppy old man opened his eyes and asked, Going out? Where to? Li waved his hand and said, Just walking around. The sloppy old man nodded and stood up. He kicked Fong, who was sitting cross-legged, to the side. Prepare the carriage. We are going to Willow Lane. Are the rumors true? Prime Minister Qin he treats you. In the small yard of Willow Lane, Zheng Zimo looked at Li Yi in disbelief. More than 10 years ago, before the Zheng family had experienced that great change, Prime Minister Qin was already the Prime Minister of the dynasty. At the time, she only knew that the Prime Minister was a very, very high official, much higher than her father. Prime Minister Qin was a veteran of 3 dynasties and had students all over the world. He was respected by all the officials in the court. In the entire Jing kingdom, the only person who could make him bow was the current emperor. But recently, the story of Prime Minister Qin bowing to the Marquis of Chang'an County, the newly promoted minister of Jinzi Guanglu, had already spread through the capital in several versions. This matter had recently spread like wildfire in the capital. Li Yi thought to himself that if it weren't for that big-mouthed bastard from the Admiralty, he wouldn't have gotten into all this trouble. Both he and Minister Qin knew what that bow represented. But in the eyes of outsiders, it was very inconceivable. Li shook his head and said, I bowed, but it's not what you think. I didn't bully the old man. Zheng Zimo looked at him worriedly and asked, Why did Prime Minister Qin go to you? He supports the King of Shu, and you and the King of Shu. This. Li Yi threw a piece of osmanthus cake into his mouth and said, Prime Minister Qin had some political issues that he couldn't figure out, so he came to me for advice. You know, the old man couldn't move easily, and it wasn't easy for him to come here. I explained it to him in detail, and then he understood and bowed to thank me. That's about it. Miss Tseng rolled her eyes at him. What kind of person was Prime Minister Qin? He had been an official for many years, and was proficient in political affairs. Why would he ask him about these things? However, since Li Yi said it so easily, she gradually relaxed and no longer asked. A burst of light footsteps came from behind. Ruoqing put a small bundle on the table and said, Miss Lu is about to give birth, right? I have nothing to do these days, so I made some small clothes. If you don't mind, you can give them to your child to wear in the future. Xiaozhu muttered. What do you mean by having nothing to do? You clearly work very late every night. Rui was due to give birth in 3 months, and the two of them hadn't started preparing these things yet. Rui knew some needlework, but no one in the family would let her do it herself. Li Yi opened the bundle. The small clothes were very exquisite, with fine stitches and very diverse styles. There were several sets of clothes for boys and girls. He smiled and said, Ruoqing is clever with her hands. It just so happens that we don't have to prepare them. As he spoke, he picked up another one from the pile. The stitches were crooked. It didn't look like clothes at all. It was clearly a few pieces of sewn cloth. Compared with the other clothes, it was like heaven and earth. Li Yi picked it up in surprise and asked, This? For fear that Li Yi didn't know, Xiao Chui, who was standing behind Zheng Zimo, immediately reminded him. This was made by our young lady. No one will think you're mute if you don't speak. Zheng Zimo looked back at her and grabbed it from Li Yi in a panic. She explained, I just sewed it casually. It's not for you. Maybe Sister Ruoqing accidentally put it in. Xiao Chui hit a little further and said, It's obvious that young lady's fingers were pricked many times by needles to make this dress. Zheng Zimo wanted to stand up and cover her mouth, but her hand was caught. Li looked at the few red spots on her fingers and frowned at her. He said, Miss Ruoqing is clever with her hands. Why do you want to join in the fun? You don't know how to do needlework. It's better if you don't do these things in the future. With her hand held by him, Zheng Zimo's pretty face was slightly red. She lowered her voice and said, Other than this, I can't do anything else. Young lady, you can still have children even if you don't know how to make clothes. Xiao Chui stood behind her and reminded her. Xiao Chui. Zheng Zimo suddenly pulled her hand back from Li Yi's hand. She gritted her teeth and looked at her fiercely. Xiao Chui let out a scream and ran away quickly. Another figure with a red face quickly stood up and chased after her. The two chasing figures disappeared behind the moon gate. Li looked at Ruoqing and said, It must be very tiring to make these things. Thank you. Ruoqing shook her head and said, I haven't done it for a long time. I'm a bit rusty. Just don't laugh at me. Li picked up a piece and looked at it repeatedly in his hand. He smiled and said, It's very beautiful. I like it very much. He didn't say thank you or anything like that. They had been together for a long time. There was no need for such things between the two of them. Has everything been okay recently? Li put away the clothes, including the one that couldn't be called a dress, and then looked at her and asked. As a boss, he was clearly incompetent. The Li family had too many businesses now. He couldn't take care of everything. She had always been in charge of the businesses that radiated out from the brothel. Without her, many things wouldn't be so smooth. Li estimated that he would be in a mess for a while. Everything is going well in the brothel. The situation in the capital city has entered a period of stability. The situation in the other prefectures is also relatively stable. Wan Ruoqing nodded and explained the situation in the brothel to him. Then she thought of another thing. But what? Li looked up at her. Wan Ruoqing thought about it and shook her head slightly. A few days ago, something strange happened, but it's nothing. They probably mistook me for someone else. She looked at Li Yi and asked with a smile. You're going back soon, right? I still have some osmanthus cakes in my room. Take them back with you. There's no hurry. Li Yi waved his hand and said with a smile. There's no one at home. I'm planning to eat here today. Wan Ruoqing was stunned. Then she stood up and said, Then I'll go prepare. Let's go together. Li Yi got up and walked in the direction of the kitchen. After a while, Xiao Chui appeared at the door of the kitchen with her hands covering her butt. She looked out and said in surprise, Li, you're eating here today. Li Yi nodded and said, Come and wash these dishes. Xiao Chui happily took the dishes and went out. Soon, a figure walked into the kitchen. Zheng Zimmel looked around and asked, What can I do? Li Yi turned around and didn't speak. He just mouthed something. After a moment of confusion, Zheng Zimmel immediately realized what he had just said. Her face instantly turned red. Chapter 787. Sure enough, the atmosphere would only be better if there were more people around. Xiao Chui was always so enthusiastic and kept putting food into his bowl. The food in Li Yi's bowl had piled up into a small hill, and he was a little stuffed. He had to remind her next time to be a little less enthusiastic, because he actually couldn't eat that much. Let's go. Li Yi rubbed the soft flesh on his waist that was still aching. He stepped into the carriage with a smile on his face and waved his hand. Fong and the sloppy old man sat on both sides of the carriage. The sloppy old man looked back and said in a low voice, Don't you think your son-in-law's smile today is very lewd, isn't it? Fong smacked his lips and said, Today's meal was very sumptuous. With the son-in-law, no matter where he went, he would never treat his mouth badly. Before the sloppy old man nodded, a foot stretched out from the carriage and kicked Fong off the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and sneered. Young man, you will be at a disadvantage if you tell the truth these days. You should weigh your own strength first. After saying that, he moved 3 feet to the side lightly, making Li Yi's kick miss. It was noon when he returned home. Li Yi got off the carriage and thought about where he should go for a free meal in the afternoon. He saw a carriage parked at the gate of the mansion. Rui and the others came back at night. The carriage looked very ordinary, but such an ordinary carriage would not be parked here. There was not even a guard at the gate. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that his house was broken into? In broad daylight, there wouldn't be such a daring thief. Li Yi walked into the house and went straight into the inner courtyard. He immediately saw someone lying on his rocking chair, rocking happily. When he stepped into the courtyard, the old emperor sat up from the rocking chair and waved his hand. This chair is comfortable. Come put it away. When you leave, move it back to Hibiscus Garden for me. Li Yi stared blankly at the 2 guards carrying away his precious rocking chair. His premonition just now was not wrong. In broad daylight the sky was clear, and the house was indeed broken into. The old emperor tilted his head to take a look, then walked over and said with dissatisfaction, What's going on? It's not easy for me to visit your family, but there's no one at home. Where have you been? Li Yi's face revealed a look of astonishment. Stealing, no robbing, and doing it in front of the owner? What's wrong with this? Were all emperors like this? Li Yi looked at him and said in a daze, Your Majesty, this is... All right, don't say anything else. Jing Emperor waved his hand and said, Prepare another table of food like the last time. Shaning and Yongning are about to finish school. I will go pick them up and stroll on the street for 4 hours. After 4 hours, I want to see the food ready. Otherwise, I will tell your wife that you went out to fool around with other women while she was away. Your Majesty, what are you saying? Li Yi smiled and said, I went out to do something, not to. The old emperor took 2 steps closer and sniffed fiercely. He raised 4 fingers at Li Yi and said, Rose, jasmine, and 2 women who didn't use perfume. For women. And if I remember correctly, you have 2 female friends in Willow Lane. The other 2 should be their maids. Do I need to continue? Your Majesty, you mentioned what to eat today. Is it the same as last time? I will go and prepare it now. Even a dog's nose was not so sensitive. Li Yi cupped his hands and walked straight in the direction of the kitchen. The reason why he promised him was because he pitied this old man. He had lived for a lifetime, and only now did he realize the joy of being human. It was definitely not because he fooled around. After relieving the heavy burden, the old emperor looked less and less like an emperor. Not only did he rob in broad daylight, but he even did such inhumane things like threatening an official. If this was known by future generations, they would criticize him to death. Where was the caretaker who recorded the emperor's words and actions? This part must be recorded. Forget it, it was better to leave this part out. Although his moral character was corrupt, his complexion was indeed much better than before. His illness had a lot to do with his mood and fatigue. If he could live in a comfortable environment, he would be able to greatly prolong his life. However, things were always like that. Since someone had removed the burden, naturally, someone had to carry it. The eldest princess's complexion did not look good. Being an emperor was an extremely exhausting task. Even martial arts masters could not bear it. This was also one of the reasons why those diligent and wise monarchs in history did not live long. 4 hours was not a short time. There was still time to save an hour for cooking. Li made some necessary preparations before lowering his head and asking, "How do you feel?" Emingzu leaned against the kitchen door and looked up. "What do you mean? These days you have to deal with all kinds of political affairs personally. It must be very tiring, right?" She lowered her head and said softly, "Father has always been like this. His Majesty doesn't have to do everything by himself," Roland said with a smile. As Li chopped vegetables, he said, "The court pays so many officials, but they do not just take their salary and do nothing. I guess that whenever those people encounter any difficulties, they will ask you to make the decision. In the long run, even a grandmaster will be mentally and physically exhausted. You have to limit the number of reports that are sent to you every day and have the Minister of State check them. Other than those major matters, don't just send any reports to you. Minor matters to the court, but to a family of 3, it may be a matter of life and death." Emingzu shook her head and said, "How do you differentiate between major matters and minor matters?" "Important matters that concern the lives of a family of 3 will naturally be handled by the local officials." Li looked at her and said, "You are the empress. What you are exercising now is the power of an emperor. Important matters that concern the fate of the country should be decided by you." Emingzu looked at him and said, "Why don't you help me?" Li was startled. He lowered his head and murmured, "Where were we just now? Oh right, speaking of how to cook this fish, do you think it should be steamed or braised?" Shanning likes to eat braised fish. Steamed is good for His Majesty's health. He looked up at Emingzu and asked, "Why don't we steam half and braise the other half?" Emingzu looked straight at him and said, "Speaking of which, you will enter the palace to help me." Li nodded and said, "Sure enough, steamed is better." After all the preparations were done, there was no need to rush. Li washed his hands and wiped them clean. He walked to the courtyard and stood in front of Emingzu. He looked straight into her eyes and asked, "Now tell me, do you like what you have done these past few days?" The eldest princess looked at him and said, "Whether I like it or not, someone has to do it. I am only asking if you like it or not." She thought for a while, then looked straight into Li's eyes and nodded slightly, "I like it." A smile finally appeared on Li's face. With her words, he had a reason for everything he had done in the past and in the future. The weight on his chest was lifted. Li felt that his eyes must be shining at this moment. Even he himself felt that it was a bit dazzling. Then he realized that it was not his eyes that were shining, but the jewel embedded in the autumn water in Mississippi Lu's hand that was shining brightly under the sunlight. At the door, Mississippi Lu held her sword in front of her chest and looked straight at him. She asked, "What did she say she liked?" Chapter 788. What did she say she liked? Although Mississippi Lu's tone and expression were calm, only Li knew what kind of waves were hidden under this calmness. Even if he was not afraid of a crooked shadow, what he said just now, if taken out of context, was indeed a bit ambiguous. Li looked at her and braced himself to say, "This, I can also explain." Mississippi Lu glanced at him, looked at Emingzu and said slowly, "You come with me." After saying that, she turned around and walked straight into the moon gate. The expression on Mingzhu's face was also very calm, and she followed leisurely. This is between us. As Li Yi followed, Mississippi Lu's voice came from the front. His footsteps stopped outside the moon gate. In fact, there was nothing much. The eldest princess only needed to explain clearly to him, so there was no need to be nervous. After all, Mississippi Lu was not an unreasonable person. She was usually unreasonable only to herself. Somewhere in the inner courtyard, the figure at the front with the sword stopped, and Mingzhu walked over, kept a few steps away from Mississippi Lu, and said calmly, "He just asked if I like the affairs of the court. I said I like it, that's all." "I know." Mississippi Lu turned around to look at her. "I heard it from outside." Mingzhu looked up at her, and asked, "If that's the case, why did you call me here?" The hickey on his face that day, it was you who left it, right? Mississippi Lu looked at her and asked calmly. Mingzhu met her eyes, and her expression did not change, and said, "That was just a misunderstanding." "I don't believe there was any misunderstanding." Mississippi Lu looked straight into her eyes and said, "I'm just giving you a piece of advice, don't forget. You are the princess of a country, you too, it's impossible." Mingzhu was startled, and a smile quickly appeared on her face, and she looked at her and asked, "Are you saying this for your sister, or for yourself?" "What do you mean?" "Whatever you mean is what I mean." The two of them stared at each other in the air, and there seemed to be the sound of metal clashing. Same old rules? Old rules. Li Yi felt that it wouldn't take long to explain this matter. It had already been a quarter of an hour. Why hadn't the two of them come out yet? After waiting for half an hour, he finally couldn't bear it anymore and walked in. He quickly passed through the two moon gates, and saw Mississippi Lu standing with her back facing him. The Princess Royal was standing opposite her. Her chest was heaving up and down. Her cheeks were slightly red, and there were fine beads of sweat on her forehead. He took 2 quick steps and stood between the two of them. Then he turned around and looked at Mississippi Lu. She was also flushed, her chest was heaving up and down, and she was sweating profusely. Looking at the two of them, could it be that they were avoiding him on purpose and had a fight in secret? Mingzhu adjusted her breathing and said slowly, "Your heart is unstable." Li Yi's eyes widened. He was extremely surprised. Could it be that Mississippi Lu lost just now? In a fight between masters, victory or defeat was determined by a hair's breadth. If one of them was bitten by a mosquito, ate too much, or had her period come, it would affect their performance. Logically speaking, it was common for people with similar strength to have wins and losses in a fight. He and Mississippi Lu often lost when sparring, which was very normal. The problem was that Mississippi Lu did not have her period today. In the past, she had never lost when sparring with the Princess Royal Highness. This was the first time she was at a disadvantage. It was going to be troublesome. A loss is a loss. Half a move is also a loss. There's no reason for it. Mississippi Lu didn't seem to care about this matter. She turned around and walked inside. After a few steps, she stopped and turned back to ask, "I'm going to take a shower. Do you want to join me?" "Together?" Li Yi was stunned. Then he said with some embarrassment, "I don't think that's a good idea." Everything had a process. He was a conservative person. Such an open-minded thing. His heart still couldn't accept it. It wasn't until Mingzhu turned around and stared at him for a long time that Li Yi finally understood. He quickly nodded and said, "Yes, there's a hot spring at the back. You two were just sparring and sweating all over. Go take a shower and change your clothes. It's time to eat later." When he first decided to buy this mansion, it wasn't just because of its environment and location. There was actually a spring there, and it was even warm. In winter he could soak in it, hug women on his left and drink warm grape wine. It was definitely a great enjoyment in life. Before moving in, Li Yi ordered people to renovate the place. Not to mention 2 people, it wouldn't be crowded even if 10 people soaked in it. In summer, it could even be used as a swimming pool. Okay. Since she had invited, Mingzhu naturally couldn't reject. They were both women, so it wasn't a big deal to bathe together. If she rejected, it would seem like she was afraid of the other party. Seeing the two of them walk to the back, Li Yi sat on a stone bench at the side. His heart finally relaxed. It was good that everything was fine. It seemed like the misunderstanding from last time had been resolved just like that. Mississippi Lou was more understanding than he had imagined. He looked back. He forgot to ask just now. He didn't know if the two of them needed a back rub. Her Royal Highness couldn't possibly serve others, and Mississippi Lou wasn't someone who would wait on others. Should he find two maids? Not long after this thought appeared, he saw the Princess Royal walk out from inside alone. You finished bathing so quickly? Lee looked at her in surprise. Didn't they say that girls needed at least an hour to bathe? She went in and came out in a few minutes at most. No matter how fast she was, it shouldn't be this fast. Emingzu sat on the other side and said coldly, I've never bathed with others before. I'm not used to it. I'll go in after she comes out. This was obviously a lie. The Tsundere Lolita often bathed with her, and when she went in, her expression was calm. When she came out, she was obviously unhappy. It was definitely not as simple as being not used to it. Unless, Lee looked at her up and down, and his eyes finally stopped at a certain spot. He seemed to understand something. There was no harm if there was no comparison. There was nothing wrong with bathing with the Tsundere Lolita. After all, she was still a child. But with Mississippi Lou, the harm was a little big. Lee instantly figured out the crux of the problem. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of the body. When a gaze fell on her, Emingzu only felt uncomfortable all over. She turned her head and looked at him coldly. She asked, I didn't have enough fun just now. Why don't you spar with me again? What do you think? Should this fish be steamed or braised? Lee stood up from the stone bench. As he walked outside, he muttered to himself, how about sweet and sour? When he walked to the door of the kitchen, his footsteps stopped. He looked back and wondered, this who won? Chapter 789. Lee thought about it carefully and felt that Mississippi Lou had won. Because the two of them were similar in strength, there had been no clear winner in many competitions. Mississippi Lou might have fallen behind due to her bad mood or some other reason. The next time the Princess Royal was in a bad mood, or needed to entertain her best friend, Mississippi Lou might have won. In other words, the chances of them winning were 50-50. On the other hand, the Princess Royal had lost completely. Mississippi Lou was more sophisticated in that aspect. It was a one-sided victory. If there were no accidents, she would never be able to make a comeback. The Princess Royal was the most pitiful. Lee decided to treat her better, and make one more soup today. Mississippi Lou had just finished showering and changed into a loose outfit. Her wet black hair draped over her shoulders, adding color to the entire courtyard. Lee had already prepared all the ingredients. He planned to start cooking when Shanning and the others were about to return. He looked at Mississippi Lou and asked, Didn't you go out with them? Why are you back? Mississippi Lou pushed her hair behind her shoulders and said, There are some things over at the Lou Alliance that I need to deal with. Then hurry up and go. She was the chief of the Lou Alliance, so sometimes she would be busy. Lee said casually, You want me to go out that much? Mississippi Lou crossed her arms and looked at him calmly. Lee suddenly felt that he should have come back after having lunch at Willow Alley. What I mean is, Lee looked at her and said sincerely, Go early and come back early. I'll wait for you at home. Men were creatures that liked the new and hated the old. The Emperor was no exception. Some time ago, he often called her into the palace to eat with him, but because the Tsundere Lolita peeled 2 prawns for him before eating and Yongning personally fed them to him, he was disqualified from the table. She said that she was willing to sit at the same table as him. She thought that Mississippi Lou wasn't as pleasing to the eye as he was. The two of them had eaten so many dishes, but no one was fighting over them. Lee saw Princess Royal walking over and sitting down. He asked in confusion, Why are you here? Emingzu looked at him and raised an eyebrow. I'm not welcome? There was an old saying, Don't talk while eating, don't talk while sleeping. The ancients were not deceiving. Lee lowered his head to eat. It was not wrong to listen to the ancients. The academy has run into some problems. There aren't enough books. If it was just the capital, there would be enough, but once the academies are built everywhere, books and paper will be a big problem. Many of the engravings of books are in the hands of the aristocratic clans that pass down their legacy through poetry and literature. This includes the majority of the paper shops in the Jing Kingdom, which are also firmly controlled by them. After Princess Royal finished her words, Mississippi Lou glanced at her and said lightly, "Let's eat. We can talk after eating." She picked up the chopsticks and put a piece of steamed fish in Li Yi's bowl. "The fish is good, try it." Li Yi almost dropped the chopsticks in his hand. He raised his head and looked at her blankly. Second Miss Lu actually picked food for him. This was the first time in history. He was overwhelmed by the favor, overwhelmed by the favor. He nodded in a daze. Just as he stretched out the chopsticks, there was another piece of spicy chicken in his bowl. Princess Royal took back the chopsticks, looked at him and said, "This is also delicious. Try it." Li Yi looked at the food in his bowl, and the other two people looked at him. In one's life, one had to face many choices. Two different choices often meant two different lives. So he had to learn to be generous. He couldn't have fish and bear's paw at the same time, but he could have steamed fish and spicy chicken. Li Yi decided to give it a try. The fish was picked up by Mississippi Lou, and the chicken was picked up by Princess Royal. It was wrong to eat either one first. For others, this was a very difficult choice, but not for him. He took a piece of pancake and rolled the two pieces of meat in at the same time. "Thank you." He stuffed the pancake into his mouth, swallowed it, and looked at the two women gratefully. The next moment, he grabbed his neck and ran to the kitchen in a hurry. Fishbone stuck vinegar. This meal was delicious, but it was all sour. When he sat back at the table, the steamed fish was no different from the sweet and sour fish, and it was the kind with too much vinegar. Even the rice in the bowl was sour. Li Yi put down the chopsticks and said angrily, "I drank too much vinegar just now, it's so sour." "Who are you calling jealous?" The two women put down their chopsticks and looked at him at the same time. Li Yi turned his head to look at the frowning second young Miss Lu, and then at the slightly focused eldest princess. He silently stood up and, without saying a word, picked up his bowl of white rice and walked into the kitchen. "Rice soaked in water doesn't taste good. I miss Rui, I miss Xiao Huan." In the Duke Chen residence, there were many people in the hall, including Minister of Ceremonies Chen Chong. They were not officials of the court, but key figures of some rich and powerful families. One of them sneered, "I'd like to see how this academy can survive without books and paper. If it's just books, the royal family should have many engravings. If Princess Royal can convince His Majesty to hand over the royal family's collection, it won't be a problem. But the paper mill, brother, you have to keep an eye on your family's paper mills. Don't worry about this, the Yu family will not sell a single piece of paper to the academy. They want to destroy the foundation of our families, and our Yu family knows the severity of this. It's good that brother Yu understands. If we can't stop those academies, I'm afraid that in a few decades, our families will only exist in name." Everyone present knew very well what their families relied on to survive for hundreds of years. If the academy was allowed to continue to develop, all the scholars in the world would be drawn to the academy, and their foundation would be destroyed. Outside the door, a delicate figure walked into the corridor. Immediately, a servant jogged forward and said respectfully, "Miss Second Master is inside discussing some matters. I'll go and report immediately." The white-haired girl waved her hand and said, "No need, I'm just going out for a walk. When second brother is done, just let him know." With that, she and a servant girl walked in the direction of the residence's gate. On a street somewhere in the capital, a young woman walked in front, and a young girl followed closely behind. Zheng Zimo turned around and glared at Xiao Chui saying, "You little girl, you're getting bolder and bolder recently. Next time you talk nonsense, be careful of your butt." The young girl pouted and said with some grievance, "Miss, Xiao Chui is doing this for your own good. You've done so many things for him. You have to let him know, or else it would be for nothing." Zheng Zimo glanced at her and said, "What for him? This is me. I'm doing it for myself, for my future child." Xiao Chui looked at her and said weakly, "Your child is still his child, there's no difference." Xiao Chui. The young girl looked at her and said with some bitterness, "Miss, you're still hiding it from me. I saw it that day. You two were hugging and rolling on the bed. Zeng Zimo blushed and glared at her, saying, We're almost at the shop, don't talk nonsense. I'll deal with you when we get back. Hello, Miss Zeng. The two walked into a cloth shop, and several women immediately came forward and bowed respectfully. It's okay, I'm just looking around. You guys go ahead. Zeng Zimo walked to the door of the inner room, then turned back and said, By the way, bring in the things I left here yesterday. A young girl responded and took out a small bag from the counter. However, the expression on her face was a bit funny, and she forced herself not to laugh out loud. She took the bag in. However, she was secretly amused. Miss Zeng was beautiful, and her painting was also good, but this needlework was really not pleasing to the eye. When she came out of the inner room and saw a guest coming in, she was startled at first, then immediately came back to her senses. She hurriedly went up and asked, Madam, what would you like to see? Chapter 790. The woman who walked into the shop looked to be in her 30s. She had a beautiful appearance but a head of extremely eye-catching white hair. This was also the reason why the girl was momentarily stunned. The white-haired woman's voice was soft as she asked, I ordered a bolt of Suyun brocade here yesterday. Have they arrived yet? I've already sent someone to hurry them. They'll be here soon. The girl smiled apologetically and said, Madam, why don't you take a seat in the inner room and have some tea and pastries? I'll inform you as soon as the goods arrive. The standard of this cloth shop was extremely high even in the capital where there were many shops. Because of the high price of the cloth, they usually entertained some important guests. Thus, a room was specially opened in the back for the guests to rest and entertain themselves while waiting. When the servant girl behind the white-haired woman helped her into the inner room, she said with a smile, If second master knows that Miss has prepared a gift for him, he will definitely be very happy. The white-haired woman shook her head and said, It's just a pair of knee pads. After the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cold. Second brother has an old injury on his leg. I only hope this can lessen his pain. As the two spoke, they slowly walked into the inner room. Hiss! Zeng Zimo put down the thing in her hand and looked at the dark red spot on her fingertip. She frowned slightly and gently sucked on her finger. She was already used to this small sting, but she was not satisfied with the thing in her hand. They were both women, but Sister Ruoqing could make such exquisite little clothes. How come it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens when it came to her? A baby's little clothes had been sewn into a mess by her. Even if it wasn't for the present, she had to think about the future. Her own child had to wear a few pieces of clothes she had sewn herself. After thinking about this, her pretty face became a bit red. Miss, are you making little clothes for the child? A somewhat surprised voice came from behind. Zeng Zimo turned around and was startled when she saw the white-haired woman. Then her face became even redder. She hurriedly put away the things in her hand and said in a panic, No, I'm just sewing it for fun. The white-haired woman sat down next to her with a smile and said, There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everything is difficult at the beginning. When I first started, I wasn't as good as you. Really? Zeng Zimo looked up at her in surprise. The white-haired woman nodded and looked at her, asking, Miss, did you do it for your child? I don't have a child yet. Zeng Zimo shook her head with a blush. The white-haired woman looked at her carefully. Her eyebrows were not open yet, so she should still be a virgin. It was indeed a little too early to prepare these things. However, wasn't she the same? 20 years ago, she had the exact same thought as her. Now there were more than 10 sets of such clothes at home, but no one had ever worn them. Her gaze fell on the hands of the girl opposite her. Looking at the clothes that were so badly made, she seemed to be reminded of something. After staring blankly for a moment, she shook her head and pointed at a certain spot on the clothes. She smiled and said, Look, this place shouldn't be sewn like this. Hearing her mention clothes, Zeng Zimo hurriedly looked up. The white-haired woman smiled and said, And here, you can't use this kind of needlework here. I will teach you a needlework technique. It was taught by the best nanny in the mansion. Zeng Zimo had a very high level of painting, and she had designed so many clothing styles. Naturally, Her imagination was very strong. The white-haired woman only needed to give her a little poke, and she could immediately figure out the mystery. She took apart the place that had been sewn, and did it according to what the white-haired woman had taught her. It was indeed much better than before. Thank you so much. At this moment, she finally found the right direction and felt a sense of accomplishment. She held the white-haired woman's hand and said excitedly. The white-haired woman smiled and asked, Miss and your lover should be getting married soon, right? Zengzimo was startled. She lowered her head and said with a blush, I don't know when. The white-haired woman patted her hand and said, Needlework is not difficult. As long as you put your heart into it, you can quickly learn it. It's urgent. This matter couldn't be explained. Zengzimo just blushed and lowered her head in silence. At this time, the girl from before walked in and said, Madam, the Suyun brocade you wanted has arrived. The white-haired woman stood up and nodded. She thought for a moment and asked, Do you have soft smoke and cicada gauze here? Soft smoke and cicada gauze were the materials that had been the talk of the capital recently. Everyone talked about them as if they were gods. There were even a few stories about these two materials that no one knew if were true or false. Although they hadn't been sold yet, the price had already reached an outrageous level. The girl shook her head and said, These two materials haven't been officially sold yet. You won't be able to buy them in any cloth store in the capital. The white-haired woman nodded and said, Then forget it. Young miss, I heard that the soft smoke net is extremely thin. If you use it as a mosquito net, it will look like smoke from a distance. Is it true? As she walked out of the shop, a young maid carrying a piece of cloth behind her muttered, I only heard about it from the second madam. I wanted to buy it for her, but since it hasn't been sold yet, we'll talk about it later. The white-haired woman shook her head and said, Let's go back. Wait a moment. Footsteps came from behind her. The white-haired woman turned around and saw the girl from before quickly walking out. Zengzimo looked at her and said with a smile, If you want the soft smoke and cicada gauze, I just happen to have some extra. If you don't mind. The white-haired woman paused for a moment before nodding slightly. Okay. Miss, this soft smoke is so thin. It would look great if it was made into a mosquito net. That girl is so generous, giving us 4 bolts at once. I heard there are only 4 colors. Now we have all of them. This cicada gauze is also not bad, and it looks good. These 2 materials can't be bought in the entire capital. I wonder where Miss Zeng got them. On the street, 2 young servant girls carried several bolts of cloth in their arms and whispered to each other as they walked. Behind them, a man with a square face turned his head and said in a low voice, Go and find out where that girl from earlier came from. The white-haired woman looked back at them and said, No need. If we meet anyone on the street, we will also investigate their background. How many people does second brother need to arrange around me? The man had a troubled expression and said, Third miss, but the second master. If second brother asks, I will give him an explanation. The white-haired woman looked at him and said, However, second brother is usually busy with work. Don't bother him with these small things. Yes, the man could only nod helplessly. The white-haired woman turned around and revealed a slight smile. Looking at the girl, she felt like she was looking at herself from many years ago. This was why she taught her those things in the cloth shop. Later, the girl sent someone back to fetch the cloth, and the 2 of them sat in the shop for a while and chatted. Of course, most of the time, it was the girl who asked her about needlework. She also answered them one by one, including the girl's request to set up a time to continue asking her for advice. She also agreed without hesitation. She could understand the girl's thoughts. She made clothes for her own child. Even if her finger was pricked by needles and was riddled with scars, no matter how much she suffered, her heart would still be sweet. Just like her from 20 years ago. Chapter 791. Ever since he lost to Her Royal Highness the last time, Li had never received a smile from Mississippi Lu. Of course, the behavior of taking the initiative to pick up food for him during meals had never appeared again. For this matter, Li felt very wronged. That day, she clearly did not perform well, which was why she lost to Princess Royal by half a move. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. These days, Princess Royal's good friend came to visit, but she did not take the opportunity to find Princess Royal to regain her face. Instead, she vented her anger on him. To think that he thought she was reasonable last time. He had really misjudged her. Moreover, she only lost by half a move, but Princess Royal lost her entire life. It was clear at a glance which was more important, and which was more important. Li Yi sighed. They were all family. She was unreasonable, but he could not argue with her. She clearly did not do anything wrong, but she still had to think about how to ease the situation. Fong walked in with a box in his hand and asked, "Young master, this broken thing is not worth much money. Why do you still want to make it?" The broken thing he was talking about was the glass that had gone from a value of 10,000 gold to worthless in a short period of time. It should be called glass now. Ever since Lioli lowered the price, the secret glass workshop had not been shut down. To old Fong, it was a complete waste of manpower and resources. He opened the box and took out something from inside. He weighed it in his hand and waved it in front of old Fong's eyes. He shook his head and said, "What's the use of this lousy thing other than being able to see people more clearly?" Sometimes old Fong was like a wise man, but sometimes he just couldn't wrap his head around it. This small mirror was something that he had spent a lot of effort to create with great difficulty. In terms of effect, of course, it could not be compared to the electroplated mirrors of the future, but it was only a little darker, and the clarity was not bad. At least, it was hundreds of times better than the bronze mirrors of this world. Glass could not only be sold as a luxury. Now that the mirror had been made, the next step, Li Yi planned to get someone to grind it, and see if they could make a set of binoculars. This thing was very useful in many places. For example, it could be used to observe the situation of the enemy in the army, to enjoy the scenery when traveling, or to steal, of course. None of this was important. The most important thing right now was how to use this mirror to mend the cracks in his relationship with Mississippi Lu. To bury the hatchet, to reconcile, to rekindle old dreams. A mirror was indispensable in a woman's room, especially for a woman who loved beauty. If a glass mirror was placed in this era, it would definitely be a treasure pursued by countless women. Li Yi glanced at Fong and was too lazy to explain to him. Mississippi Lu had just finished practicing her sword, and was now wiping her precious autumn water. Li Yi walked over and stood in front of her. Mississippi Lu continued to wipe her sword without lifting her head. Li Yi handed over the already embedded mirror and said, "Don't wipe it yet. I'll give you something." One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Mississippi Lu finally spoke, but she still did not raise her head. Li Yi moved the mirror closer again to make it easier for her to see herself in the mirror. Second young mistress Lu finally stopped moving. She stared at the woman in the mirror, whose features were extremely clear. She was completely stunned. She was used to seeing a blurry bronze mirror. It was impossible for her not to be shocked when she suddenly saw her other self in the clear glass mirror. "What's wrong? Have you never seen such a beautiful woman before?" One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Li Yi looked at her proudly. "This is the one and only Lioli glass mirror in the world. Just take it as me being solicitous. If you don't want it, I'll give it to someone else." In a flash, the mirror in his hand disappeared. He did not even have time to react. This made Li Yi understand more about the gap between him and Mississippi Lu. "Thanks." She really liked the mirror in her hand. The bronze mirror in the room could be thrown away in a moment. Mississippi Lu raised her head and glanced at it. With this sentence, it meant that she had been bought over by him. This mirror was worth it. Fong looked at this scene from afar with an extremely surprised expression on his face. He had seen the second miss arguing with the son-in-law because of jealousy these days. Just because of that broken thing, the second miss compromised first? Although there were many things he did not understand, he was not stupid. If the second miss liked it so much, it meant that it was not that broken. It was very likely to be a valuable treasure. He quickly walked over and looked at Li Yi. He smiled and said, "Son-in-law, the workshop has made more than 10 pieces of this thing." He counted with his fingers and said, "You can give away 10 pieces at most. Can you leave 2 for me?" Li Yi looked at him in a daze. He then looked back at Mississippi Lou and found that Mississippi Lou was also looking at him at the same time. Mississippi Lou crossed her arms, her eyes shining. One of a kind? Li Yi's face darkened. He grabbed Feng's arm and walked out. Go, go, go. Why are you keeping it? You need to change this habit of yours. If Mrs. Feng finds out, I'll see how you deal with it. He couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. If he gave Miss Lu a mirror, it meant that he had to give many more. The one in Rui's room was naturally the brightest and largest. Xiao Huan, Shanning, and Yong Ning's room were all in cartoon shapes. Princess Royal got 1, Willow Lane got 2, Feng got 2, and his family got at least 2 more. The last one was taken by Li Xian. He needed more time to make it again. What do you think is the principle of this glass mirror? Why can it reflect people's figures so clearly? Why is the handwriting in the mirror reversed? Li Yi was fishing in the lake of the School of Mathematics. Since he found that the fish here were fat and easy to catch, he did not plan to buy from the market. It was best to catch fish by himself. However, since Li Xian came over and started talking to himself, he had not caught a single fish. He had caught 2 just now. It was enough for today. Li Yi put away his rod and looked at the Princess Royal in the pavilion behind him. He asked, "Last time, the School of Mathematics lacked books and paper. Have you solved the problem?" Although it was not class time, the 3 deans were here. Even the students of the School of Mathematics avoided them. Before the eldest princess could say anything, Li Xian said, "Of course not. How else can we solve this? Normal books are easy to deal with. Although most of the engravings are controlled by the powerful families, the ones we can find should be enough. However, the books you specified don't have engravings. How to print them is a big problem. If we were to engrave them one by one, it would cost a lot. I'm afraid that most of the money we have would have to be invested in this area," he said angrily. "And paper. Once the schools of mathematics start to operate, there will be a huge demand for paper. Although the higher the demand, the lower the price. However, almost 90% of the paper shops are in the hands of the rich families." In order to discuss this, Emingzu visited the Yu family 3 times. She didn't even get to see the head of the Yu family. "You still have the cheek to say that?" Li Yi threw down the fishing rod and looked at him. He asked, "If there is no engraving, why don't you think of a way? Paper is expensive, and the rich families don't cooperate. Why don't you reduce the cost and make your own? If you have to rely on Emingzu to think of a way, what use is the Academy of Sciences? What use are you?" Chapter 792. Solve the problem of engraving? Li Xian looked as if he had heard a fairy tale and stared straight at Li Yi. "It's easy for you to say. Do you think it's like the existing collections of history? There are countless engravings, and the teaching materials you mentioned have not been compiled yet. Where can I find so many craftsmen to engrave them one by one? Even if I can really engrave them, I don't know how long it will take. As for improving the paper making and lowering the cost, if it could be lowered, it would have been done long ago. There are many kinds of paper on the market, but only a few are suitable for writing. The aristocratic families like the Yu family, which have been around for hundreds of years, all have their own unique paper-making formula, which is the most widely circulated in the market. If they don't cooperate, this matter can't be improved." Li Xian's spittle flew as he spoke, and his tone was rather indignant. "No one has solved these 2 problems for thousands of years. How can we solve them so easily?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Oh, do you want to bet?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What do you want to bet on?" "Let's bet on whether I can make cheap and high-quality paper, and whether I can think of a way to print books in large quantities in a short period of time. Haha, these 2 things are related to all the scholars in the world. Don't try to trick me. If you have such a method, you would have taken it out when you were building the academy. Why would you wait until now?" Li Xian sneered and asked, "Tell me, what are the stakes?" "I haven't thought of the stakes yet. We'll talk about it later, but I'm sure it won't be too much." "Why, are you afraid?" "Afraid?" Li Xian sneered. "Why don't you go out and ask around? I'm the crown prince. What have I been afraid of? Then do you want to bet or not?" No. Although he was not afraid, If he still insisted on betting with him knowing that he would lose, then it wasn't a question of whether he was afraid or not, but whether he was stupid or not. Based on past experience, whenever he made a bet with her, he must be very confident about something. Today, his tone was so certain that it couldn't be any more successful. Only a fool would make such a bet. Li Xian had a fierce expression on his face as he said, "You have to teach the Yu family a lesson and help Emingzu vent her anger." Li Yi picked up the 2 fish and walked back. As he walked, he muttered to himself, "How should I eat the fish today? Thank you so much for the past 2 days." In the small pavilion of the cloth shop, Zheng Zimo stood up and bowed to the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "It's okay. I have nothing to do anyway. I haven't touched these things for many years, so I'm a bit rusty. I probably won't have the chance to do it in the future. I'm afraid I'll forget about it if time passes." Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "How can there be no chance to do it? I don't know if your child is married yet. In the future, your child will also have children. They will be very happy wearing the clothes you made." "My child." The white-haired woman's eyes were a bit dazed. Then she smiled and said, "That's true. While I can still do it, I should make more. After a few years, I won't be able to do it." She turned to look at the girl with a smile and said, "I like the fabrics in this shop very much. If there are any new styles in the future, please keep an eye out for me." Zheng Zimo nodded with a smile. "Recently, all the famous fabrics in the capital are available here. As long as you have heard of them, just send someone to get them." Due to some marketing reasons, many of the best fabrics needed to be preheated in advance. After a period of discussion in the capital, they would be pushed out. Before this, it was almost impossible for others to get the fabrics. However, these cloth shops and the clothing shops in the capital were all under her control. Naturally, there was no problem of not getting the goods. Chen Miaoyu suddenly looked at Zheng Zimo and asked, "Miss Zheng is about to get married, right?" Zheng Zimo heard this and blushed a little. She whispered, "No, not at all." Chen Miaoyu looked at her with a smile on her face. She held her hand and said, "Although we are women, since we have met someone we like, we still have to fight for him. How can a moment of reserve compare to a lifetime of happiness?" Hearing this, her face became even redder. She had seen, kissed, hugged, and even said such shameful words. How could she still have any reserve? In short, don't regret what you do now. Chen Miaoyu patted her hand and said, "I should go too. I will see you off." Although they hadn't met many times, the two of them were very congenial. When they walked out of the inner room hand in hand, they heard a slightly messy sound coming from the shop. Inside the shop, a young girl said apologetically, "My apologies, sir. The soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn haven't arrived yet. Please wait for a few days. As soon as they arrive, we will immediately send someone to inform you." Inside the shop, the young man hugged an enchanting woman and whispered with his head lowered, "You see, they don't have the goods here. There's nothing we can do." The enchanting woman said coquettishly, "It's not that they don't have the goods. These 2 kinds of fabrics are only produced in their shop. Young master you doesn't know, but she can tell you that they don't have them here. Those slutty foxes in the Jade Courtyard all use them." The young man showed a hesitant expression. He didn't know the details of this cloth shop, but he knew that it was impossible to do business in the capital without some kind of background. The Yu family was also a big aristocratic family in the Jing kingdom. Although it was not as big as the Cui family and the Wang family, it was not far behind. Because of the relationship between the king of Shu, the Yu family and the Cui family were especially close. Unlike the Cui family, which mainly dealt in jewelry, the Yu family had been running a paper mill for decades. The Yu family's paper name was known throughout the Jing kingdom. In the eyes of most people, they were a top scholarly family. However, this was not the capital he was proud of. At least for now, the Yu family did not have the capital to let him run amok at the bottom of a well. Just as young Master Yu was hesitating, the enchanting woman beside him leaned over and whispered something in his ear. "I heard that the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn are extremely thin, and the color is also beautiful. If I wear them, I will definitely look good with half of them covered. When the time comes, I will wear them for you to see. Although young master you didn't know what soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn were, he understood the woman's words. Suddenly, a blurry image appeared in his mind. Although the Yu family was not strong enough to run amok in the capital, that was in the past. Now even the eldest princess, who presided over the court, had a favor to ask of the Yu family, but she did not get to see her father. Recently, the Cui family was extremely satisfied with the Yu family. In the future, when the king of Shu ascended to the throne, the Yu family might be able to climb even higher. Even if there was someone behind the shop, they would not dare to provoke the Yu family now. Once again thinking of the eye-catching image that appeared in his mind, young Master Yu reached into his robe and adjusted his posture. Then he looked at the woman and said angrily, "How dare you lie to me? You didn't receive the goods? Then tell me, where did the cloth on the outside come from?" Chapter 793. In the shop, the young girl had an awkward expression. Young master, we really. You shut up." Young Master Yu impatiently waved his hand and interrupted her. "Where is your shop manager? Let him personally tell me if you have any goods or not." As soon as he finished speaking, several men who looked like guards immediately walked up and stood behind him. They were full of vigor. A slightly older woman turned around to look at the door of the inner room. Seeing the woman at the door nod slightly, she immediately walked up and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. We don't have soft smoke silk and cicada wing yarn at the moment. I don't know where young master's residence is. Once we have the goods tomorrow, we will immediately send someone to deliver them to your residence." Seeing the attitude of the shop manager immediately soften, young Master Yu's heart calmed down a bit. It seemed that the power behind this shop wasn't that great. However, since the other party had expressed goodwill, he didn't need to be overbearing and make an enemy for no reason. "Ning Yuan Ho's residence," he lightly said. He lowered his head to look at the enchanting woman and whispered, "You see, they said that they will deliver it tomorrow. Why don't we wait a bit longer?" "I will listen to young master." The woman nodded. She then glanced around the shop and her eyes suddenly lit up. She pointed at a young maidservant in front of her who was holding a roll of cloth and said, "That Kunyu courtyard has a relationship with them, so they can always get the latest styles earlier. I won't ask for anything else, but young master, I also want a roll of cloth like that." Young Master Yu tilted his head and glanced at this woman. He had spent a lot of effort to win over this woman. She was a famous prostitute in the capital. It was said that she hadn't been combed. Although he only wanted to play with her, he still wanted to spend a night with her so that he wouldn't waste the effort of the past few days. He only wanted to quickly get tonight. Before that, he would naturally do his best to satisfy the other party's request. It was only a roll of cloth. He pointed at the maidservant and said to the cloth store manager, "Did you hear that? Bring 2 rolls of cloth like the one in her hands for this young master." The steward looked back with a troubled expression and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. This type of woven cloud brocade will only be available for sale in 3 months. The soft smoke gauze and cicada wing muslin were going on sale today, so it was fine to give it to him 2 days in advance. However, this woven cloud brocade was a new material that wasn't going to be put on the market in the near future. She didn't have the right to decide. This time, there was no need for the enchanting woman to pout coquettishly. Young Master Yu's expression had already darkened. Just now he had clearly told the other party that his home was Ning Yuan Ho Mansion. But now, the other party was pointing at the cloth in the servant girl's hand and said that it would only be sold in 3 months. Was he teasing him? The weight of the 3 words, Marquis Ning Yuan, was not so light. Moreover, the Yu residence of today was no longer the Yu residence of yesterday. It was about to soar to new heights. As the 3rd young master of the Yu family, how could he be humiliated again and again? He took 2 steps forward and suddenly smiled. "What did you say? Say it again." At this time, another woman walked out from behind and said faintly, "I'm very sorry, this shop's cloth is still in the testing stage. This bolt is only a sample. If this young master is really interested, please come back in 3 months." When he saw the woman in front of him, a strange expression appeared on young Master Yu's face. He then pointed at the young servant girl holding the cloth and said, "Oh, a sample. Since it's a sample, then give this young master 8 or 10 bolts. Otherwise, this young master would like to ask, why can your cloth be given to the prostitutes in the brothel, but not this young master?" Thinking of the woman's words, young master Yu's gaze swept across the room. When he saw the white-haired woman, he curled his lips and said, "The brothels these days really have all kinds of tricks. There are even white-haired girls. I don't know how those people could bear to do it." He didn't conceal his voice when he said this. Zheng Zimo was startled when she heard this. Then anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. However, before she could speak, a clear voice reached her ears. "Shut up." Inside the shop, a middle-aged man's expression had been calm until young Master Yu said this. His face instantly turned ashen. He took 2 steps forward and slapped him hard in the face. Young Master Yu seemed to be stunned by this sudden slap. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. After stabilizing himself for a long time, he felt the burning pain on his face. Only then did he understand what had just happened. "What are you still standing there for?" He kicked the guard next to him and said angrily, "Break his hand for me. Third young miss, go in and rest for a while. Leave this to us." The middle-aged man turned around and said softly. He cracked the joints of his hands, and when he turned back, his expression became fierce. He looked at the dozen or so figures coming in from outside and ordered, "Be careful not to break anything in the shop." At this time, seeing the crowd surrounding them, young Master Yu, who realized what had happened, began to pale. "You, what do you want? My father is Ning Yuan Ho, and I am a member of the Yu family. You, if you dare to make a move." Zheng Zimo was pulled by the white-haired woman into the inner room in a daze. Only a moment later, the middle-aged man came in and said respectfully, "It's all taken care of. Third young miss, let's go." Qin Miaoyu turned her head and smiled at Zheng Zimo. "I'll go first." Zheng Zimo nodded absent-mindedly. Only now did she understand that the identity of this Madame Chun, who was skilled in needlework, did not seem to be as simple as she had imagined. At this moment, young Master Yu was no longer in the shop. He and his guards had been grabbed by the arms and thrown out of the shop. Only the enchanting woman was left. Her face was pale, and when she came to her senses, she screamed and ran out in a panic. In a brothel somewhere in the capital, several women looked at the enchanting woman who walked in and said with a smile, "Oh, why are you back so early today? Why didn't that young Master Yu pester you a little longer? Sigh, why am I not as lucky as my sister? The Yu family is truly noble. If I can be taken back by young Master Yu as a concubine, I won't have to worry about wealth for the rest of my life." The enchanting woman laughed and teased them for a while. Then, she went upstairs by herself. She walked into her room and closed the door. "How is it?" The enchanting woman turned around with a solemn expression. Looking at the other side of the curtain, she said, "It's very different from the plan. There wasn't much conflict with the other party." She quietly recounted what happened today. After a long time, a voice came from the other side. "It's fine, these are enough. The one who suffered today was young Master Yu. As long as the Yu family doesn't pursue the matter, isn't Milord's plan." The Yu family. The voice of the man behind the curtain was still very calm. Whether to pursue the matter or not is not up to the Yu family. Chen Chong only has one sister. For her, he would turn against his own family. That person will not let the Yu family off easily. However, one Yu family is not enough. "Milord, leave the capital before tomorrow and never come back." Chapter 794. The capital magistrate Lu Dayo had been very busy recently. Every day he worked day and night. He was often busy until late at night. He could fall asleep with his head on the pillow, causing his wife and concubines to complain a lot about him. He could only pretend that he did not see their resentful gazes. Several academies in the capital were still in the midst of preparations. After the corresponding preparations were completed, they would have to face the problem of recruiting students. Her Highness had handed this matter over to him, so he naturally had to do his best. Now that His Majesty had retired and Princess Royal was temporarily in charge of the court, Lu Dao had more opportunities than most of the officials in the court. After all, as the former magistrate of Anxi County, and what he had done after coming to the capital city, he had long been labeled as Princess Royal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a great credit for the preparation of the academy. Fortunately, since Princess Royal took over the government, the situation in the court had changed. Many people didn't know the situation for a while, so the capital city was much more peaceful. There were no more chores to bother him, so he could concentrate on the preparation of the academy. Your Excellency. Arrestor Zhao knocked on the door and walked in. He stood in the hall and cupped his hands respectfully to Wei Xiaobao. What's the matter? County Magistrate Lu glanced at him and asked, Is there another difficult case? It's not difficult. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, Today I saw people from Marquis Chen's mansion fighting with people from Marquis Ningyuan's mansion on the street. Marquis Chen's mansion and Marquis Ningyuan's mansion? County Magistrate Lu put down his pen and frowned. These two families have always been close, and they are both King of Shu's people. What kind of fight did they have? Did they report it to the Yamen? Not really. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, People from Marquis Ningyuan's mansion seem to have suffered a loss and then went their separate ways. County Magistrate Lu glared at him and said, Why did you come to me if you didn't report it to the Yamen? Don't you think I have enough things to do here? I have spoken out of turn. Detective Zhao hurriedly bowed and turned to leave the hall. He whispered, Young master, you could have provoked anyone, but he provoked third Miss Chen. Who? Hearing that name, County Magistrate Lu trembled and asked, Who are you talking about? After a while, after listening to Detective Zhao's story, County Magistrate Lu breathed a sigh of relief and murmured, It's good that you didn't intervene in it. Just pretend that you didn't see it. Don't get involved in it. He knew better than anyone else how Royal Prince Duanyang's 2 ribs were broken. Furthermore, although he hadn't been in the capital for long, he had long heard of the rumors about the minister in charge. That was a lunatic who wouldn't even recognize his own family as long as his reverse scale was touched. The Yu family, were in big trouble. Hai Dukchen Public House. Yu family. Chen Chong took a sip of tea and said, The eldest princess has visited 3 times, but Yu Dingfeng refused to see her, claiming to be sick. He has also announced that he won't sell a single piece of paper to the academy. The official workshops belong to the imperial court, and can't all serve the academy. If this problem can't be solved, I'm afraid that the eldest princess's academy can only be built in the sky. Opposite him, Chen Qing nodded. The imperial consort is very satisfied with the Yu family this time. In addition, the Yu family has always been His Highness the King of Shu's wallet. This time, the Cui family has suffered heavy losses, so the Yu family's importance is even more prominent. In the future, the Yu family will have a high status in the imperial court. Perhaps at that time, even our Chen family will have to rely on them. Although they didn't want others to climb over their heads, the Yu family's importance now surpassed that of the Chen family. If they really succeeded in the future, the Yu family's contributions would not go unnoticed. The 2 brothers continued to comment on the current imperial court situation, when a servant came in to report. Chen Qing looked down and asked lightly, What's the matter? The servant immediately said, Just now outside, a few guards of the Chen family had a conflict with 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence. 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence? Hearing this, Chen Qing frowned and asked, Was it Li Yan or Li Xing? What happened? Was anyone injured? It's not the 2 young masters. No one in our residence was injured, but 3rd Young Master Yu suffered a small loss. It's good that no one was injured. Chen Chong waved his hand and said, Young people are hot-blooded and can be forgiven. This is nothing. Send someone to prepare a generous gift, and send it to the Yu residence. Then this matter will be considered settled. If it was anyone else, there would naturally be no need for generous gifts. However, the Yu family was different. The Yu family had a bright future ahead of them, so the Chen family still had to show some sincerity. He looked at the servant and asked, If it wasn't Li Yan or Li Xing, could it be Li Shen? We had just confined him a few days ago and just released him today. And he's already causing trouble again? The servant knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, "It wasn't young Master Li Shin either. It was third young Master Yu's guard. That third young Master Yu didn't know third young Master Yu's identity and said some vulgar words. Miao Yu?" Qin Chong suddenly stood up from his chair and asked, "What did the one surnamed Yu say? Speak." He said that third young master is a prostitute. Crack. The teacup shattered and the tea splashed everywhere. "Bastard, he's Yu Dingfeng's good son." An extremely gloomy voice sounded in the hall. Not long after, a wave of disorderly footsteps resounded within the Chen estate. The Chen clan's second master's face was livid, and a few dozen guards followed behind him as they hurriedly left the Chen estate. They headed west in a threatening manner, and all the people on the way moved aside in terror as they gazed towards a certain direction with lingering fear in their hearts, wondering exactly what had happened in Yuan Marquis's residence. Tears welled up in the eyes of the gorgeously dressed woman. She held third young Master Yu's hand and sobbed. Who did this to him? My poor Yuer. Chen family. How did you get into a conflict with the Chen family? How many times have I told you? The situation in the capital is unclear, so try not to cause trouble for me. Do you all have ears? A middle-aged man stood next to her and glanced at the bruised and swollen face of third young Master Yu with a pained expression. He turned his head and asked the guards with a cold expression. One of the guards replied fearfully, "Third young master didn't do anything and they attacked first. This time, it really wasn't young master's fault." As he spoke, he recounted the entire incident. Of course, he omitted the part where the young man had insulted the woman from the Chen family, offending the Chen family just for a prostitute. Ning Yuan Ho, Yu Dingfeng's face darkened as he said, "When will you grow a little more careful? The Chen family has gone too far. Yuer didn't do anything and they beat him to this state." The woman's eyes welled up with tears as she gritted her teeth and said, "Master, you must get justice for you, The middle-aged man looked at third young Master Yu and asked with a frown, "You already told them where you came from. Why would the Chen family attack you for no reason?" Third young Master Yu's face was full of resentment as he said, "How would I know? The Chen family are all crazy. That second young master of the Chen family is crazy. And so is that white-haired woman. I only said one thing to her." "What did you say?" Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed and his heart skipped a beat. "What white-haired woman?" Third young Master Yu acted as if he didn't see the panic on his father's face and said, "I don't know. I only heard that person say something about third young Miss. Third young Miss Chun, third young Miss Chun. Oh no." Ning Yuan Ho's face was pale. He had just muttered a few words when someone ran in from outside in a panic. A servant of the Yu family panted heavily as he ran over and said with a terrified expression, Master, something bad has happened." The Chen family is here." Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed drastically and he waved his hand without hesitation. Quickly hide the young master." The second young master of the Chen family had brought a group of people with him and aggressively attacked Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Even in the capital, which never lacked for entertainment, it was still a big event. After hearing the news, the entire capital was in an uproar in an extremely short period of time. Countless people were paying attention to the development of this matter. Some people were watching from the estate while others hurriedly left and rushed in the direction of Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Inside the yamen, County Magistrate Liu reminded Constable Chen again. "Remember, you didn't see anything just now and you don't know anything." At the Ministry of Revenue yamen, Assistant Minister Zeng hurriedly took his leave and immediately left in a sedan chair. At the Cui family estate, a carriage drove out from the side door and quickly headed in a certain direction. Qin estate. Qin Yan, who had just heard the news, quickly walked out of the estate. Just as he was about to step onto the carriage, a voice came from behind him. "Big brother, where are you going?" Qin Yan already had one foot on the carriage. He turned his head to look and frowned. "Where did you go again? You didn't even eat lunch at home. Lord Father just asked." Qin Fifth Master smiled and said, "There was a new show at the brothel today. I was so engrossed in it that I forgot the time. If you like to listen to shows, just buy a few actors at home." It's best not to go to that kind of place. Qin Yan said this and then boarded the carriage. He let down the curtain and urged, "Quick, to Ning Yuanho's estate." Qin Fifth Master shook his head. When he stepped into the Qin estate with his hands behind his back, he muttered in a low voice, "How can the shows at home be better than those outside?" Chapter 795. The second master of the Chen family, Chen Chong, had led dozens of guards from the house of high dukes. They passed through the streets and alleys, aggressively attacking Ning Yuanho's residence. This incident had caused quite a stir in the capital for the past 2 days. The Ho's residence had been attacked. On a large scale, this was a crime punishable by death. But on a smaller scale, it could be so small that the authorities did not even need to show up. The attackers were from the House of High Dukes, led by Chen Chong. When the incident happened, the capital was in an uproar. However, this incident did not cause any serious consequences. Although the main gate of Ning Yuanho's residence had been torn down, the Yu family did not say anything. The authorities would not come looking for trouble. The commotion yesterday was not small. Not only the Chen and Yu families but the Zeng, Cui, and Qin families, as well as many officials from the King of Shu's faction, all went to Yu's residence. Although it was not known how the incident was resolved, it was not a big deal. Li Yi knew about this yesterday, but he was only a little surprised. Internal strife was the custom of the King of Shu's faction, so he was not surprised. At this moment he was listening to Xiao Cui complain that someone had caused trouble at the cloth shop yesterday. Although they were chased out, they said some nasty things that even she could not bear to listen to. That madam was very kind and taught the young miss many things. Now the clothes that the young miss sewed were not as ugly as they used to be. Who was causing trouble yesterday? Li looked at her and asked. Xiao Cui thought for a moment and said, "It was something like young master Yu. I think it was Ning Yuanho or something. I can't remember." Li Yi was startled. Ning Yuanho. Why did these 3 words sound so familiar? It seemed that the Yu family head that the eldest princess could not meet was Ning Yuanho. This morning, the internal strife incident was still spreading in the capital, and Ning Yuanho was also the male lead. The Yu family, what a coincidence. If the Yu family bullied others like this, the heavens would naturally accept it. He shook his head and then asked Xiaotsue. "Earlier, you said that the madam who has been very close to your young miss recently, what's going on?" "This." Xiao Cui blinked and said, "I met her at the cloth shop last time. That madam is very good at needlework. She taught young miss how to make children's clothes." "Do you know which family's madam is it?" Although the 2 women were surrounded by people to protect them, Li Yi did not want to give them the feeling that they were being monitored all the time. In addition to ensuring their safety, he would not interfere with other things. Even so, the sudden appearance of a madam by her side still had to be investigated. "I don't know. We only know that her surname is Chen." "That madam has never mentioned it, so we can't ask her directly. However, she usually brings a lot of guards with her when she goes out." Xiao Cui blinked her eyes twice, then she patted her head and said, "That's right, that madam's age isn't that old but her hair is all white. That servant girl called her third lady. Third miss surnamed Chen, and her hair is all white?" Li Yi was stunned. It can't be such a coincidence, right? On the street, Zeng Zumo and the white-haired woman walked side by side. The latter turned her head to look at her and asked, "The Yu family didn't make things difficult for you afterward, did they?" Zeng Zumo shook her head. "No, this is the capital. They wouldn't dare to do anything. The Yu family is powerful after all. It's better to be careful," she reminded. "If the Yu family makes things difficult for you in the future, come find me at Duke Chen's residence." Although the 2 had seen each other several times these days, due to their own reasons, they usually referred to each other as Madam Chen and Miss Zeng. They had never voluntarily revealed their identities. Zeng Zumo had already guessed that her identity was not ordinary from yesterday's incident, but she still did not expect it to be to this extent. Even the current Zeng family could not compare to a behemoth like the Chen family. Soon, she threw these thoughts to the back of her mind and nodded politely. She glanced around and suddenly realized that they were almost at Willow Lane. She pointed forward and said, My house is just ahead. Madam, do you want to come in and sit for a bit? Hearing this, the white-haired woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded lightly. Miss, are you not from the capital? As the two walked forward, the white-haired woman suddenly asked. This area belonged to the downtown area. There were no big mansions, and officials and rich families would not choose to build their houses here. This Miss Zeng had an extraordinary temperament, and she had such a shop in the capital. She had thought that she was also the daughter of such a family, but now it seemed that this was not the case. I stayed in the capital for a few years when I was a child. Later, I went to another place and came back last year. Zeng Zumo briefly mentioned this matter. She did not want to mention some memories about the capital, including her own name. After all, more than 10 years ago, the Zeng family was also prominent. However, in that Zeng family, all the men of the direct line died, and the women became the musical house. Everything here, for her, was an extremely horrible memory. The white-haired woman did not ask further. The two walked to the entrance of an alley. Zeng Zumo smiled and pointed inside, saying, "It's in there." Above the entrance of the alley, there was a stone plaque, on which the words Willow Alley were written. The white-haired woman just glanced at it, and walked in side by side with Zeng Zumo. After a few steps, she suddenly stopped and murmured, "Willow Alley?" As if thinking of something, she looked back at Zeng Zumo with an expression of disbelief and expectation. "Miss Zeng. Is it Miss Zeng Zumo from Willow Alley?" Hearing her name from the mouth of a person she had never revealed made her completely ignore the fact that the Willow Alley in front of her was not the eldest daughter of the Zeng family. Her body trembled, and her face turned pale. However, after Mrs. Chun said this, the expression on her face was different from any of what she had imagined. Surprise, and even a little bit of love? Seeing her reaction, Chun Miaoyu knew that her guess was right. Holding her hand, a smile appeared on her face, and she said, "It turns out to be you. I should have asked earlier. Zeng Zumo was confused by her reaction and asked in confusion, "Mrs. Chun, you know me?" Chun Miaoyu held her hand and said with a smile, "Let's go in and talk." Zeng Zumo was pulled by her and walked into the alley in a daze. "Okay, I'll go first. When your young Miss or Miss Ruoqing comes back, just let them know." In the small courtyard, Li Yi stood up and patted Xiao Chui's head, saying, "Next time I come, I'll bring 2 glass mirrors for you and Xiao Zhu." Really? Xiao Chui's eyes were shining. She had envied the mirror in her young Miss room that could clearly reflect a person's figure for a long time. "Yes, you must keep your promise." Li Yi walked to the door of the courtyard, then turned back and waved. "Let's go." He raised his hand to open the door, but the door was pushed open from the outside. "I didn't expect you to know before." Zeng Zumo turned her head and walked in while talking to Mrs. Chun. When she stepped over the threshold, her chest was suddenly pressed by something. She looked back, saw Li Yi standing at the door, and lowered her head again. Looking at Miss Zeng and Miss Chun standing at the door, Li Yi's mouth slightly opened. He could swear on his conscience that just now, he really just wanted to open the door. "You're back, what a coincidence." His expression didn't change. He helped her tidy up her clothes, and said with a smile, Chapter 796. How old are you? Your clothes are wrinkled and you don't even know how to tidy them up. If it wasn't for Xiao Chui, you wouldn't even be able to take care of yourself. Li Yi helped her tidy up her clothes and looked at her with a frown. Then he turned to the white-haired woman and smiled. "You're here too. Come on in." Zeng Zumo looked at him and then at Mrs. Chun next to her. Confusion appeared on her face again. After walking back and sitting down in the guest hall, Li looked at Miss Chun and said, "I heard about what happened in the cloth shop yesterday. Thank you very much." Zeng Zumo whispered, "It's me who should be thanking someone. What does it have to do with you? It's the same. Third Miss Chun looked at Li Yi and her face and said with a smile, "Ah." Zeng Zumo was confused. She found that ever since Mrs. Chun knew her name, her attitude toward her had changed significantly. She was a little confused. At this moment, she still had a lot of questions in her mind, but she could only suppress these thoughts for now. Miss Chen looked at Zeng Zimo with a loving expression. Then she turned to look at Li Yi and asked, Rui should be giving birth soon. How is her health recently? Li Yi nodded and said, there are still 3 months left. She is a martial artist and has always been in good health. Zeng Zimo was surprised. She knew Li Yi very well. He was very casual when talking to anyone. Even with elders, he was not afraid to make some harmless jokes. This was the first time she had seen him so well behaved. He even used honorifics to address others. This attitude was unprecedented, so she couldn't help but be more confused. Zimo, there isn't much to do at the brothel. Let's eat dumplings today. Wan Ruoqing walked in from outside. Seeing the situation in the hall, she was slightly startled and asked, there are guests. This is Mrs. Chun. Zeng Zimo stood up and introduced her. Then she asked, if you don't have anything else to do, why don't you eat here before leaving? Miss Chen was startled for a moment, then a smile appeared on her face and she said, okay. She stood up and walked over. She naturally held Ruoqing's hand and asked with a smile, you must be Miss Ruoqing. You are indeed a rare beauty. Wan Ruoqing felt a little guilty under her gaze. She didn't know why this Mrs. Chen, whom she met for the first time, was so enthusiastic. She secretly glanced at Zeng Zimo with a slightly confused expression. Zeng Zimo was also confused. She had never mentioned Sister Ruoqing to her. Why did she call out her name at first sight? At this moment, she was even more confused. She just wanted to ask Li Yi about it after Mrs. Chen left. Third Miss Chen seemed to realize that she had lost her composure. She let go of her hand and said, sorry for disturbing you today. Not at all, not at all. Wan Ruoqing said hurriedly. Then she said, I didn't expect to have guests today. I will go out and buy more stuffing, Miss Ruoqing. You don't have to do that. Third Miss Chen looked back and said, Xiao, or go out and buy some more. The servant girl called Xiao, or had a troubled expression. She walked to her side and whispered, but miss, today is your birthday. Second master is at home. Go. Yes, miss. The servant girl bit her lip and finally nodded. She walked out. Wan Ruoqing turned around and ordered, Yuzhu Xiaocui, go bring the stuffing and the dough I rolled this morning to the courtyard. We will go over there to make dumplings. Hee hee, time to make dumplings, just watch. Can the dumplings you make be eaten? It's as if the dumplings you make are edible. We still have to rely on Sister Ruoqing. The 2 servant girls chattered and ran away quickly. Wan Ruoqing and Third Miss Chen chatted and laughed as they walked out. Zeng Zimo and Li Yi were a few steps behind. Zeng Zimo tilted her head and asked, have you and Madame Chen known each other for a long time? Li Yi shook his head and said, it's a long story. I will tell you later. Zeng Zimo nodded and glared at Li Yi. She asked, didn't you say that you are a martial arts master, and that nothing within a radius of 300 feet can escape your ears? Bragging was just bragging. He was only slightly better than ordinary people. Within a radius of 300 feet, he could hear other people's voices more clearly than ordinary people, but it wasn't that exaggerated. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been caught by the old emperor hiding behind the bushes. 300 feet is a bit exaggerated. Actually, my skills are slightly weaker than 300 feet. How much is that? 3 feet. Is the distance of a door 3 inches? Li Yi looked at her with some embarrassment and anger. You are a girl. Why do you have so many questions? The voice paused and then said, there are no creases on my clothes just now. Here, and here lanterns are hung off. Have you invited everyone that should be invited? Check again. Who said they can't come? Ask again. If they are sick, then tell them to scram. Drunken Moon Brothel has many guests today. The food and wine will take some time to prepare. What kind of guests are they? Chase them out. If there is a problem with one dish today, they won't be able to open again. What? 20 tables is too many? Just let them do as they say. Can't they just eat one table and throw one table away? All of you be more attentive. If you mess up tonight's matters, then all of you can scram. In the house of High Duke, Chen Cheng, the Minister of Ceremonies, did not look like an important official of the court. He walked quickly in the house and shouted without a care for his image. The servants in the house all held their breaths and were very careful. Today was the third lady's birthday, and the second elder had been preparing for it since half a month ago. Not only had he invited many distinguished guests, but the High Duke's public house had also been decorated with lanterns and streamers. At night, the capital city's most famous performers would perform on stage, and there would be no shortage of folk arts and acrobatics. According to the tradition of previous years, the capital city's most magnificent fireworks display would appear tonight. This tradition had been going on for more than 20 years without missing a single year. This was practically the most important event of the year in the House of High Duke. It was even more important than the birthday of the master and the second master. In the Chen family, mistakes in other areas could be forgiven, but today, even a small mistake would be met with heavy punishment. After inspecting the house of Chen for the third time, Chen Chong raised his head and drank a pot of cold tea before asking, "Where is the third lady? Is she not back yet?" A servant of the house of Chen immediately walked up and said, "The third lady went out early in the morning and has not returned yet." Chen Chong waved his hand. "Send someone to look for her. Don't let anything go wrong today." As soon as he finished speaking, a House of Chen guard hurried over from afar and whispered a few words in Chen Chong's ear. Chen Chong's face immediately darkened. He asked in a cold voice, "What did you say?" "The third lady went to Willow Lane, and that Li Yi was there as well?" The guard nodded. "Yes, when I found out, I immediately came back to report. The few of you follow me out." Chen Chong ordered coldly and strode out of the house. A group of more than 10 people walked out of the house of Chen, causing some people on the street to stare in shock again. Most people did not know what had happened when the people in charge of the house of Ningyuan yesterday attacked the house of High Duke, but those who were in the know knew very well that even with the Cui and Qin families' persuasion, the house of High Duke still paid a great price to settle the matter. Today, seeing the second master of the Chen family like this, who was going to be in trouble? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.